Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen. Amen. Namaste.
Oath or affirmation. Announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, I have received communication from Dr. Rudal Munilal MP, member for Urupuch East, who has requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the member seeks is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions. Papers.
The Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I have the honor to lay paper number 1, the annual report on consolidated financial statements of the First Citizens Investment Services Limited and its subsidiaries for the year ended September 30th, 2021. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that paper 1 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee.
Honorable members, the question is that paper 1 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, I have the honor to lay paper number 3, the annual report of the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago for the year ended September 30th, 2020.
The Minister of National Security.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honor to lay the annual report of the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board for the period 1st of October 2019 to the 30th of September 2020.
The Leader of the House.
Thank you kindly again, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay paper number 2, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries to the second report of the Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure on an inquiry into the management of the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission, TNTEC, and related recommendations, second session 2021 to 2022, 12th Parliament. Paper number 5, the annual report of the Environmental Management Authority for 2019.
The Minister of Energy and Energy Industries and Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the report of the committee appointed to investigate the factors contributing to clinical outcomes of COVID-19 patients in Trinidad and Tobago.
Reports from committees.
Member for La Hokita, Talparo. Member for Cuba South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have the honor to present the third report of the Joint Select Committee on State Enterprises on an inquiry into the operations of the trial with specific focus on the proposed measures to assist in achieving the objectives of the National Environmental Policy and Trinidad and Tobago's progress towards achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals SDGs, second session 2021 of the 12th Parliament.
Prime Minister's questions, urgent questions.
Member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, to the Honourable Minister of Public Utilities, will the Minister state the reason or reasons for the recent massive power outage and blackout that occurred throughout Trinidad?
Minister of Public Utilities.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on Wednesday, the 16th of February 2022, at 12:52 p.m., a short circuit fault occurred on a 12,000 volts overhead line, which crosses under the two 220,000 kilovolt transmission overhead lines, which connects the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission system to the Trinidad Generation Unlimited Company power station in La Brea, the system's largest power station. As a result of the fault, initial indications are that the 12,000 kilovolt overhead line, the conductor burst and made contact with both 220 kilovolt transmission circuits, causing them to suffer simultaneous short circuit faults. Protective systems immediately took these transmission circuits out of service as they were designed to, resulting, however, in the instantaneous disconnection of the TGU power station from TNTEC system. This sudden loss of 40% of the overall power being generated resulted in a rapid decline in the system frequency, which could not be sufficiently addressed to avoid the tripping off of the remaining 3 independent power producers, PowerGen at Point Lisas, Penal, and Trinity Power Limited. This resulted in the complete de-energization or blackout of the power system in Trinidad. The power system in Tobago was unaffected by this event, as it is separated from Trinidad's power system, and as such, the supply to customers in Tobago continued as normal. At 1 p.m., TNTEC crews had completed works on rectifying the fault and requested that all independent power producers commence attempts to restart all generating units. The first successful reconnection of generating units occurred at 3:11 p.m. at TGU from 2 generating units. An attempt...
Your speaking time is now spent. Member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam. Honourable Minister, in light of the answer that you provided, could the Minister indicate why the government has not taken immediate steps to launch an investigation instead of leaving proposals before the Cabinet without any timeline to launch such?
Remember, you have 15 seconds to ask a question. Minister.
Madam Speaker, the government has acted with quick dispatch to respond to all the issues emanating from this power outage. The government has demonstrated urgency in taking action when the National Security Council was convened in an urgent meeting to meet with all the stakeholders and being briefed on all the issues affecting this power outage. The government, coming out of this National Security Council meeting, has made a decision to launch an independent investigation in this matter as a responsible government, and which will be done very soon.
Member for Point of View.
Supplemental, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, based on the last response from the Minister, independent investigation, could the Minister ask who are those members on that committee?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, the composition of the committee or the investigator, if it's a sole investigator, that information will be divulged to the community as soon as it is available.
Member for Point of View.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 2 to the Minister of Public Utilities. One of the guaranteed electricity standards set by the Regulated Industries Commission for Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission, TNTEC, is that failure to restore supply within 10 hours in an unplanned outage on the distribution system requires TNTEC to pay compensation of $60 to residential and $600 to non-residential customers. Will this standard be applied to Wednesday's blackout?
Minister of Public Utilities.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I wish to thank the Honourable Member for point of prayer for this question. Madam Speaker, I need to make it abundantly clear that this standard is subjected to two exceptions: force majeure events and other events that are outside of TNTEC's control. As I've read out a short while ago, there was a huge issue emanating from the independent power producers, which impacted upon TNTEC's ability to provide a supply of electricity to the country, and therefore consideration in resolving this particular matter.
Member for point of prayer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Supplemental to the Minister. Based on your response, Minister, I just want to guide you that you're saying it's independent stations. But I want to guide you to Kelvin Ramsuk, who TNTEC General Manager on CNC3, and he said the fault developed in one of the major circuits which triggered independence. So the question I'm asking, based on Kelvin Ramsuk's statement, is that he is saying that it's TNTEC...
Member, for point of prayer, I've allowed you, but it's 15 seconds and I haven't heard a question. Do you have a question to ask? Please ask the question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Minister, could you say that if Kelvin Ramsuk was wrong in his assessment that it's TNTEC's fault that caused the blackout on Wednesday?
Madam Speaker, I was asked a specific question in relation to the quality of standards that TNTEC is obligated to comply with, and my response is in relation to the law and TNTEC's obligation in accordance with the quality of standards set by the RIC.
Member for point of prayer.
Speaker, based on the Minister's first response to my question, could the Minister state when would it be possible for the RIC option of the 60 and 600, when would it ever be available to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago?
Okay, sir, I will not allow that question, Member for point of prayer, as a supplemental question. Member for Caroni East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Health, due to the nationwide blackout which lasted for more than...
On a radio station, which claimed there were 4 deaths. I can say categorically that is untrue. There were no deaths in the public healthcare system as a result of the national power outage, and there was no compromising of patient care. Members of the public are advised that the established contingency measures of the public health facilities were quickly activated. This ensured that critical care continued to be provided. All public hospitals are equipped with emergency backup generators, which were utilized. Major hospitals also had on-site adequate diesel storage in the event the generators were needed beyond the usual generator run times. Where required, electrical supply was prioritized for critical areas as per protocol, such as all intensive care units, the neonatal intensive care units, to ensure continuity of care for those at highest risk. I would like to take this opportunity to thank each CEO of the RHAs, Davlin Thomas, Ronald Sawyerfat, Celicia Bash, and Dr. Brian Amor, and their respective teams for engaging their emergency. And I am sorry that you chose to go down this line. No patient care was compromised. There were no deaths. And we should be thanking the system instead of casting aspersions on them.
Did the staff at these public healthcare institutions have access to computerized records of patients during this blackout?
All right, so, Member for Caroni East, based on the standing orders, that does not arise as a supplemental question coming from the responses thus far. Member for Cuba South.
Thank you very much. Minister, you just informed this House that there was an adequate provision of generators in the public healthcare system. Could you inform this House then, why are there trucks with generators on the compounds of the Mount Hope Medical Hospital as we speak, seeking for it to be installed?
It's called
Minister Fenn.
contingency planning. It's called being proactive, just in case something else happens. We are not going to de-escalate the response as yet. I am absolutely shocked and amazed that you will ask a question like that. It's called contingency planning. It's called following protocols. It's called preemptive action. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions on notice? Questions for oral answer?
Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, there are 4 questions for oral answer. We'll be answering all 4. There are no questions for written response.
Member for Miaro.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the member for Mayaro, question number 50 to the Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance.
Question number 50, Madam Speaker. Thank you. At the time of the 2020 budget presentation in 2019, the government had signaled its plans to stimulate the economy through the use and application of digital technology. However, in March 2020, the country experienced the unexpected and unprecedented effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. The impact of the virus on the nation's economy and public service infrastructure led to the establishment of a cross-sectoral and cross-functional committee to create a roadmap for this country's national economic recovery. This roadmap recognized the need for urgent action on the digitalization of all government services, as well as the stimulation of the growth of the information and communication technology sector. At that time, the conceptualization of the Tech Promotions and Development Company was in its developmental stage, I would say embryonic stage. The Ministry of Public Administration and Digital Transformation was introduced after the elections of 2020 as part of the government's implementation of the National Economic Recovery Strategy. This led to a rethinking of the strategy related to the Tech Promotion and Development Company. The government in 2021 subsequently took further action and introduced the Ministry of Digital Transformation. We also introduced a number of fiscal measures, removal of taxes on electronic equipment, tax allowances for businesses which invest in tech startups and new tech businesses, and so on. The Ministry of Digital Transformation is tasked with designing and implementing a developers hub, creating a vibrant local software development community, training and certification in open source software, support with quality control, access to mentors, opportunity for developing web applications, and so on. In other words, we have moved way beyond the single objective of a technology company to a broad-based plan to revitalize and grow the digital sector through an integrated approach for development and growth. In other words, an enabling environment.
Member for Cuba North.
He joined it all.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the member for Cuba North, question number 51 to the Minister of Public Utilities.
Minister of Public Utilities.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the residents of the communities of Brickfield, Oja, Mirage, and environs are provided with a supply of pipe-borne water from the Caroni Water Treatment Plant. The Water and Sewage Authority has advised that pipeline infrastructure servicing the area, which was installed many years ago, is undersized and negatively affects the supply of water to residents. As a result, residents currently receive a scheduled supply of water. In order to provide the residents with an improved water supply, WASA has identified the need to upgrade the pipeline infrastructure in the area by the installation of 1.5 kilometers of 200 millimeter diameter pipe from Roopsing EMBD to Temple Street, Brickfield, via a cross-country route, which will interconnect to the existing distribution system. This project is targeted to be undertaken under the third phase of the Ministry of Public Utilities Community Water Improvement Program, the implementation of which is subject to the availability of funding.
Member for Point of View.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Minister, thank you for your response. But on behalf of the constituents, could you state when the infrastructural work will start?
Madam Speaker, the third phase of the Community Water Improvement Program is scheduled to commence in March. And as I've just said a short while ago, it is subjected to the availability of funding. But based on our schedule, the third phase of the project or the program is due to commence in March of this year.
Member for Cuba South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Minister, based on the work that is currently being contemplated and taking into consideration the dry season water schedule supplies published by WASA effective the 15th of February 2022, could you inform this House how this affected constituent will get a reliable supply of water based on WASA determining that they will rotate water schedule once for 9 days and 4 days, etc.?
Member for Cuba South, that question does not arise from the answer given. Member for Cuba North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the member for Cooper North, question number 52 to the Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, in 2020, as part of its emergency food support measure, the government launched the Food Box Initiative, which involves the provision of local agricultural products and chickens to vulnerable persons who may be adversely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Madam Speaker, let me take this opportunity to make it abundantly clear that this food support measure was in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The regulations, the restrictions, and the fact that there were people who could not work and there was a need to provide a measure of food support to vulnerable families. As a consequence, the NAMDEVCO spearheaded this initiative in 3 phases. Phase 1 spanned May to July 2020, Phase 2, October to April 2021. And in May 2021, the 3rd phase of the program was launched as a 1-month emergency food support measure because of the COVID-19 restrictions in early May 2021. The intention was that food support would be provided to 25,000 families that month. On May 10, 2021, this was expanded to 125,000 families up to the end of September 2021. This was further expanded to the end of December 2021. In this phase, chickens and frozen provision packages were also distributed to the 139 local government councillors in Trinidad and 12 assemblymen in Tobago. This 3rd phase cost over $100 million and reached close to 200,000 families. Madam Speaker, while it is not the intention of the government to further extend the emergency food support measure as part of its COVID response, the government intends to have a similar program in a reduced form as part of the suite of social services provided by the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. A team from the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, NAMDEVCO, and the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries is working to develop a proposal for the consideration of Cabinet. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Point of order.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Based on the Minister's response, could you state when this similar program would start for the people of Trinidad and Tobago?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, the team is actively working on this program, and we will start it imminently.
Member for Couva North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of question number 53, on behalf of the member for Couva North to the Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The answer is yes.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers.
Leader of the House.
Sorry, Madam Speaker. I was just taken aback by my colleague's answer. Madam Speaker, there has been agreement to allow the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries and Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister to speak until the conclusion of his statement. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members, is this the wish of the House? The Minister of Energy and Energy Industries and the Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have been authorized by the Cabinet to make the following statement. Unfortunately, we continue to be in a pandemic, that is COVID-19, which we have been dealing with for over 2 years. The world, and Trinidad and Tobago is no exception, was forced to deal with a potentially deadly virus that was highly transmissible. And we, as a people, had to respond. We responded as a government by being guided by the science, following the World Health Organization, WHO, care system under the Ministry of Health, a team of experts led by our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Roshan Parasaram. The world had to learn, adapt, and respond in managing this virus. At all times, the government's priority was to protect the population as best as possible and to ensure that our public health care system was provided with the best resources that we could reasonably do in our circumstances so that persons who required treatment for both COVID-19 as well as all other medical attention would be able to access same. Fortunately, Madam Speaker, we have managed so far to be able to achieve this, and even though in the waves of COVID-19 surges that we have had to endure at times, our public healthcare system was pressed its limits. At no point in time did it collapse under the weight of the effects of the virus. We managed. We managed due to the commitment and dedication of our healthcare workers, their professionalism and ability to step up to the plate time and time again, and due to the government's commitment to prioritize and provide the necessary resources to the public healthcare system. Even before the first COVID-19 case was detected in Trinidad and Tobago on March 12, 2020, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago had begun preparations to deal with the treatment of the virus. One of the pillars of our response to COVID-19 was to build out a parallel healthcare system dedicated to the treatment of patients afflicted with the virus who require care and hospitalization. Unfortunately, whilst having to deal with all of the natural difficulties of managing this pandemic and keeping our public healthcare system operational, including a parallel healthcare system, the opposition began publicly attacking not only the government's efforts to protect the population, but also attacking the medical healthcare professionals who are providing the care, guidance, and advice in responding to COVID-19. The opposition have been attempting to sow seeds of doubt and through unfair and uneducated criticism have been trying to affect the public's trust and confidence in our public healthcare professionals' efforts in responding to the virus. The leader of the opposition has even gone so far as to personalize her attacks on the credibility of the team of public healthcare experts that advise the government and the population with respect to the virus. The government has had to defend its policies and actions, as well as the conduct of the public servants, managing this pandemic in the courts on numerous occasions, and to date, we have successfully done so. Madam Speaker, the government asked a team of independent experts to investigate and assess the public healthcare system and its treatment of COVID-19 patients. It was the Honourable Prime Minister who announced the appointment of a 5-member committee of independent experts to investigate the factors contributing to clinical outcomes of COVID-19 patients in Trinidad and Tobago. At the time of this announcement, the Prime Minister gave a commitment that on receipt of the report of the committee, he would lay it in Parliament for public consumption. At the end of presenting this statement, I will lay a copy of the 105-page report of the committee in fulfillment of the Prime Minister's commitment. The Prime Minister, having received his copy of the report this week, has ensured that it is laid in the Parliament on the earliest possible date. The report is dated February 14th, 2022, and was delivered to the government on February 15th, 2022. Madam Speaker, the composition of the Committee of Independent Experts was as follows: Professor Terence Simangal, Professor of Medicine and Chest Specialist, Dean of the Faculty of Medical Sciences, University of the West Indies, St. Augustine Campus; Professor Musha Phyllis Pitt Miller, Professor of Clinical Anesthetics and Intensive Care, University of the West Indies, St. Augustine Campus, and Consultant Anesthetist, Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex; Dr. Anton Cumberbatch, Specialist in Public Health and former Chief Medical Officer; Dr. Vidya Dean, Consultant in Anesthetics and Intensive Care; and Professor Donald Simeon, Professor of Biostatistics and Research, the Director of Caribbean Center for Health Systems Research and Development, University of the West Indies, St. Augustine Campus. We thank them for their work and taking on the task given to them. Madam Speaker, the terms of reference of the committee included, inter alia, an examination of the admission, discharge, and transfer (ADT) policy and procedure to determine the impact, if any, on clinical outcomes. A determination as to whether the treatment and management protocols adopted by the hospitals are consistent within WHO guidelines and international best practice, with access to adequate A, levels of staffing appropriate in a mass response to a global pandemic; B, essential medicines; C, laboratory and diagnostic imaging services; and D, PPE, oxygen, and other items. To identify any other factors that may affect clinical outcomes, including, but not limited to, A, suboptimal home treatment, for example, utilizing non-WHO approved therapeutics; B, delayed presentation to health facilities; and C, efficiency of the transfer system in transporting patients from home to hospital and into hospitals in the RHA Health Network. Madam Speaker, the committee was convened on 17th of January 2022 and deliberated until February 14th, 2022. The committee collected data over a 3-week period and then proceeded to analyze, deliberate, and craft their report. The committee conducted what they have described as, quote, a rapid assessment, unquote, through the following mechanisms. 1, meetings with technical officials of the Ministry of Health to determine what policies and data were available. 2, visits to COVID-19 care institutions in Trinidad and Tobago. 3, informal interviews of staff during their visits. 4, confidential interviews of staff from all RHAs involved in COVID-19 care. 5, interviews of senior management of the RHAs. 6, audits of medical notes. 7, statistical analysis of secondary data sets of persons who died from COVID-19, who were hospitalized and who were managed at home. And 8, an online survey of persons who were treated for COVID-19 at public healthcare facilities. In the speaker of their report, the committee stated, inter alia, that, quote, We found that the admissions, discharge, and transfer policies for COVID-19 patients are within the ambit of international best practice, especially as recommended by the WHO. We found that the implementation of the policies during the pandemic were hampered by unpredictable staff shortages and staff burnout. We recommend that close attention needs to be paid to staff morale as well as the purchase of some consumables. We wish to commend one institution where there was a staff mental health and wellness service, serviced by 2 psychologists, as an example of best practice. Another area of best practice was that at many of the institutions that were visited, staff told us that they routinely communicated with the families of COVID-19 patients on a daily basis. Unquote. The report goes into detail as to the methodology that the committee used in carrying out its assessment and sets out their findings. Some of the highlights that I wish to draw to your attention, Madam Speaker, are: 1. The primary data collection included interviews. 1. Interviews of key healthcare sector stakeholders. 2. Site visits to COVID treatment facilities. And 3. Patients' online survey. Secondly, patients' notes were reviewed as one way to investigate the quality of care that patients received at COVID-19 hospitals. The notes reviewed were confined to those that were treated in the ICU or HDU, the sites with the highest COVID-19 mortality. Requests were made for all relevant policies and protocols that guide the treatment and care of COVID patients in Trinidad and Tobago. An analysis was done of COVID-19 deaths, hospital admissions, and patients managed at home. This included looking into the demographics, places of death, presence of comorbidities, and vaccination status. The committee looked at the level of care given to samples of patients. The committee considered the effects of weight and obesity, non-communicable diseases, NCDs, including diabetes and chronic diseases. The committee looked at the transfer and transporting systems for COVID-19 patients. The committee looked into the admission criteria and found that, quote, the admission criteria met international best practices. It would seem that the patients were admitted to the correct location to receive the appropriate type of care. However, the staff told us that it was their impression that during the recent surge, patients, quote of the staff, presented late, and as such they were more seriously ill, unquote of staff. We were not able to detect any delays in the provision of care which might have led to a negative result, except that they presented in the second phase of the disease. Madam Speaker, with respect to the discharge criteria, the committee found that, quote, the discharge policy was well planned and appeared to work well from our assessment of the medical records, staff comments on our facilities tour, from the patient survey and staff interviews, unquote. The committee raised concern with respect to staff levels, citing shortages and conditions as areas that needed addressing. The committee recognized that shortages of staff are, quote, an international problem in this pandemic, unquote. And lastly, the committee did a specific assessment of the COVID-19 response in Tobago and provided their findings with respect to same. Madam Speaker, the committee concluded its report with 16 recommendations. I highlight the following for the public, but due to the limitations of time, it is not feasible for me to read out all 16. Data management system data verification. The committee said, quote, there is an urgent need for electronic medical records, unquote. With respect to NCDs management, quote, it is likely that citizens with NCDs would again be at increased risk for poor outcomes if and when there is another event such as the COVID-19 pandemic. The clinical staff who have been hired temporarily and whose contracts would be discontinued at the end of the pandemic should be redeployed to respond to the NCD morbidity rate debt that has accumulated during this pandemic, unquote. With respect to dedication of frontline staff, quote, we were impressed with the application of the nurses, doctors, paramedical and support staff who managed COVID-19 patients. However, at some RHAs, some of the staff in the front line felt abandoned by the leadership, We recommend the RHAs implement a specific feedback system to monitor the needs of staff on the front line, unquote. With respect to supplies from C40, quote, the frontline staff need 24 hours per day by 365 days support during the pandemic. We recommend that C40 should be continuously open 7 days per week, unquote. And with respect to the drug Tocilizumab is given at an advanced stage of COVID-19. Most staff were very impressed by its effects, and perhaps C40 needs to increase purchasing of this drug. Though it is an expensive drug, there is a cost-benefit to be realized. We recommend the policy regarding Tocilizumab use to be reviewed, unquote. Madam Speaker, these are some of the pertinent areas of this report that was commissioned by the Honourable Prime Minister. The independent team of experts performed their duty and provided their key findings and recommendations. It is important to note that they did not find that the parallel healthcare system, or indeed the team of public healthcare professionals leading the medical response to COVID-19, to be outside of the international best practices. In keeping with the Prime Minister's commitment, the report is hereby made public, and the government will study it and its recommendations and make any adjustments that it can which are reasonable in improving the clinical treatment of COVID-19. In conclusion, on behalf of the government and the people of Trinidad and Tobago, I thank the 5-member committee for their work and report, and I thank all of the healthcare givers and personnel in our public healthcare system who have worked tirelessly for us, the people, during the course of this pandemic, and may God continue to bless them and their families, and indeed our country. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Hyderabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Minister, with regards to the report...
So, member, this is
sorry,
in accordance, yes?
Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 24.4, I just wish to seek elucidation. So, Minister, thank you for that report. I just wanted to ask, can you indicate whether, based on the findings of the report, and there were many, by the government with regards to the staff shortages identified, what measures the government intends to take to address that?
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, the report did identify certain issues with respect to staff and potential staff shortages along the way. The report also went on very clearly to indicate that this is a global phenomenon. The report stated that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, globally, public healthcare institutions and other institutions are suffering staff shortages. It is something that the government is aware of. The Ministry of Health and the Minister of Health will do their best to address and look into how it can be alleviated. But the main point to be made is that this is a global phenomenon and not something at all unique to Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I am authorized by the Cabinet to make this statement on behalf of the Office of the Prime Minister on the establishment of an independent expert committee to investigate the cause of and national response to the nationwide power outage on Wednesday, February the 16th, 2022. Contrary to statements made in the public domain by persons who should know better, Over the last 12 years, there have been a number of major electricity power outages in Trinidad and Tobago. We all remember, only too vividly, the nationwide power outage that occurred 9 years ago on the night of March the 29th, 2013, under a previous government. In that 2013 incident, since the main generating capacity is located in the Deep South, it took up to 18 hours for electricity to be restored in several areas of the country, such as northwest Trinidad. That 2013 blackout and its aftermath attracted international attention and was widely featured in the foreign news media, including the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Tampa Tribune, and the Miami Herald. But that 2013 outage was not the only one that occurred during that period. In December 2012, a blackout along the entire northwest of Trinidad stumped Christmas shopping. In August 2011, lightning struck TNTEC's bamboo substation in Valsain, and power outages occurred in North, Central, and East Trinidad. In July 2010, lightning struck a power station during heavy rains, causing blackouts in several parts of Trinidad. That incident caused 7 generators to trip at the Point Lisas facility, affecting areas in Point Fortin, Faizabad, Santa Flora, and surrounding areas. Wednesday's nationwide outage resulted in loss of power to several areas in North Trinidad for up to 12 hours, although several areas in the south got their supply back within 5 hours. However, Tobago, which has its own supply, was not affected. Notwithstanding the fact that there have been several major power outages in Trinidad before, the government considers this week's outage to be a very serious matter, which requires immediate, independent, and expert investigation. As a consequence, I wish to announce that the Office of the Prime Minister has appointed a 3-man specialist team to thoroughly investigate and determine the causes of and the national response to the nationwide electricity power outage that occurred on Wednesday, February the 16th, 2022, and to make recommendations to prevent a recurrence of such an event. The team will be headed by retired Professor of Electrical Engineering, Chandraban Sharma, PhD. Professor Sharma joined UWI in 1986. He received his BSc in Electrical Engineering from the University of the West Indies in 1979, his MSc from the University of the West Indies in 1982, and his PhD also from the University of the West Indies in 1993. Dr. Sharma's research interests are in the areas of energy systems and energy economics. He is an acknowledged expert in electrical engineering with over 40 years' experience in the field, specializing in electrical power, among other related areas. The second member of the team is Mr. Keith Serju, a distinguished structural engineer and retired university lecturer, with master's and bachelor's degrees in civil engineering and 50 years' experience in engineering. He is also a former chairman of TNTEC. The third member of the team is Acting Superintendent Alistair Guerrero, a senior police officer, currently assigned to the Special Branch with 25 years' experience in policing. His mandate will be to examine all national security matters associated with and arising from the power outage. The team will be empowered to co-opt any other expertise and resources that it requires and is expected to report within 1 month. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Personal explanations.
Honourable members, leave has been granted to the member for St. Augustine to make a personal statement. Member for St. Augustine.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, at the sitting of the House on Friday, February 4th, 2022, I had moved a motion on the adjournment entitled "The Failure of the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government to lay the 10th report of the Elections and Boundaries Commission for the purposes of local government election." And after it was sent to the Parliament, approved and tabled. Madam Speaker, the raising of this matter emphasized the importance of tabling such a document and, more importantly, demonstrated the role of the opposition in holding the executive to account in our democratic republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, based on the clarification provided and having been advised that an administrative error occurred, it was my view that the minister's responsibility in accordance with the Act left the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government accountable to the Parliament for the delay, and that the minister still had a duty to ensure that the report was in fact laid. But in the circumstances, I wish to apologize, Madam Speaker, for any insinuation or suggestion that may have been attributed to me as a result of my presentation on that Friday 4th, and particularly anything that could have been construed as an attack or criticism on our very dedicated and hard-working parliamentary staff. Therefore, Madam Speaker, I wish to record my sincerest regret to you and to this House, and to reaffirm my commitment to discharging my responsibilities as a parliamentarian on behalf of the people of St. Augustine constituency, which I represent, and Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Introduction of bills. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a minister. Public business, government business, bills second reading.
The Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that a bill entitled "An Act to Amend the Judicial and Legal Service Act, Chapter 601, the Prison Service Act, Chapter 1302, the Defense Act, Chapter 1401, the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501, the Civil Service Act, Chapter 2301, the Fire Service Act, Chapter 3550, and the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago Act, Chapter 7201, to provide a regulatory framework for polygraph and drug testing and biometric identification for members of the protective services and certain officers in the judicial and legal service and the civil service, and for other related matters, be now read a second time. Madam Speaker, I am more than pleased to present for the consideration of the honorable members of this House the Miscellaneous Provisions Testing and Identification Bill 2022, which seeks to bring laws governing the protective services, judicial and legal service, and certain other departments in the civil service in line with the 21st century realities. The bill seeks to give the relevant heads, where appropriate, of the various protective services and specific branches of the civil service a discretionary power to order that current officers and those seeking to be employed in those organizations be subjected to lie detector testing, drug testing, and the collection of their biometric information. However, this discretionary power may only be exercised in specific circumstances. Madam Speaker, work towards this bill began as far back as 2018, when in my then capacity as Minister in the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, I took the decision to engage our Law Reform Commission to consider the introduction of lie detector testing, drug testing, and other measures to ensure that members of the protective services and certain officers in the civil service are held to the highest standard of integrity. The highest standard, Madam Speaker, because we observed that it varied from place to place and almost person to person in this place. The Commission conducted the necessary research and subsequently prepared a policy paper entitled Introducing a System of Lie Detector Tests, Drug Tests, and Biometric Identification within the Protective Service and certain departments of the public service, in which certain recommendations were put forward. The Commission also prepared the bill currently before this House, which seeks to implement the recommendations of that policy paper. Madam Speaker, I venture to say the rationale for this came because we learned and we considered that this reform was absolutely necessary in the face of serious and sustainable, sometimes, allegations against members of our protective services and certain public officers, they being involved in all manners of criminal activity. Thus, it is imperative that a system of lie detector testing be introduced to ensure that employees and prospective employees in those arms of the state possess a high standard of integrity which is expected by the citizenry of those who hold such offices. We also anticipated, Madam Speaker, that these kinds of developments will act as a deterrent to officers who may be inclined to engage in criminal activity and other forms of serious misconduct. As it now stands, only the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, by way of their regulation, provides for drug testing at the recruitment stage for entry, of course, into the police service, and randomly during employment. Other arms of the state, as I have identified, do not require such testing. Madam Speaker, in several jurisdictions around the Commonwealth and the world, for example, the United Kingdom, Australia, the United States, and Canada, members of the police services, armed forces, customs, and immigration departments are subject to drug testing prior to and several times during their employment. So these measures that we offer today are not unique, they are not novel, they exist as we speak in many other places in the Commonwealth and the wider world. In these jurisdictions, testing for cause and random testing are provided for in legislation governing the respective departments and can also be required at the occurrence of a critical incident which resulted in the death, injury, or damage to property. So I'm saying, Madam Speaker, the need and the circumstances will arise for such testing, not only randomly and routinely, but sometimes when specific incidents resulting in death, injury, or damage to property occurs. Biometrics allow for persons to be identified based on a set of recognizable and verifiable data. The introduction of biometric identification, which touches issues such as fingerprints, vein patterns, eye patterns, facial signatures, and voice recognition, The introduction of biometric identification system within the protective services and the other departments that I outlined will assist investigations into alleged employee misconduct. A facial recognition system, for an example, will enable investigators to identify with greater certainty employees who may have acted in a manner that amounted to misconduct from photographs or video recordings captured from CCTV footage. Thus, the existence of a modern biometric identification system as proposed in this bill will as well serve as a deterrent to employee misconduct as they stand the risk of being very easily identified. Therefore, biometric identification system is critical in promoting greater responsibility and accountability within the protective services and the other branches of the police service. In respect of the actual bill, Madam Speaker, which contains 9 clauses, it requires these measures a special majority vote pursuant to Section 13 of our Constitution. Clause 1 of the bill provides for the short title and the commencement provision. Clause 2 provides for the act to be inconsistent with the Constitution. The measures proposed in clauses 3 to 9 would involve subjecting members of the protective services and the classes of the public service identified to a number of intrusive processes or procedures. These would include, Madam Speaker, having electronic devices attached to their persons. For example, like the polygraphing, there are 3 or so tubes that have to be attached to a person's chest and stomach area in order to give effect to that. As well, Madam Speaker, some of these processes may require being required to provide here a urine sample, a blood sample, saliva samples for drug tests, having their faces and eyes scanned for biometric identification and unique identification data stored in a database, providing voice samples to be stored in a voice recognition database. These measures raise important constitutional issues, Madam Speaker, and will infringe on the well-established constitutional rights, including the right to protection of the law under Section 4B of the Constitution, the right to private life under Section 4C, which provides for the right of the individual to respect for his private and family life, and the right to equal treatment under 4D, which provides for the right of the individual to equality of treatment from any public authority in the exercise of any functions. Madam Speaker, clauses 3 to 9 will seek to insert new sections in the Judicial and Legal Service Act, the Prison Service Act, the Defense Act, the Police Service Act, the Civil Service Act, the Fire Service Act, the Financial Intelligence Unit Act, to confer on the heads where applicable, because in some cases, Madam Speaker, it is the Service Commission that will do that kind of recruitment. But in those cases, for the heads of those of the protective services, and of course the Judicial and Legal Service, to an express power to mandate the officers under their purview to submit to polygraph or any other lie detecting test, because polygraphs is not the latest or the only way of testing for lies and challenges of truthfulness and integrity by definition or extension. They have the right to submit to order that people be subjected to drug tests, and of course the collection of their biometric information for the purposes of integrity testing. Clause 3 amends the Judicial and Legal Service Act by inserting a new section 11A, which provides that the various heads of department, in this case the Comptroller of Customs and Excise, the Chief Immigration Officer, the Chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue, the Registrar General, may order a law officer or the collection of biometric information. A law officer in this instance relates to both permanent and contract lawyers employed therein. The Prison Service Act as well amends Clause 4 amends the Prison Service Act by introducing a new subsection 28(9) to basically achieve the same kinds of objectives. Similarly, the Defense Act in Clause 5 amends the Defense Act in similar ways. Clause 6 amends the Police Service Act similarly to provide for the Commissioner of Police being able to to order an officer to submit to a polygraph or lie detecting test or to provide biometric information. In respect of the Civil Service Act, Clause 7 amends that act by introducing a new Section 11A, basically to achieve the same thing, and the specified departments therein in respect of the civil service is the Customs and Excise Division, the Immigration Division, the Board of Inland Revenue, the Registrar General's Department, the Transport Division. These proposed amendments apply to officers who hold substantive posts in these departments, as well as I have indicated before, officers on contract. Similarly, Madam Speaker, Clause 8 amends the Fire Services Act to similar effect. And of course, the Financial Intelligence Unit Trinidad and Tobago Act, Clause 9 amends that to similar effect. Madam Speaker, it is to be noted that in those amendments that I have just identified, the amendment is not identical from one act to the next. What we try to do in these measures as we offer them to the House is to achieve the lowest common denominator in all of them. That is to say, for it to act as a deterrent, for it to provide for integrity, testing, and honesty, and all the attributes that we expect of, and in fact must have from these public officers, Madam Speaker, if we are to move forward. Madam Speaker, I've often said, since the 1990s in this place, many of the very corrupt things that happen in this country, including the importation of drugs and guns and that sort of thing, could not have happened without the complicity of officers of the state. I remember when I said that in the 1990s, and a whole newspaper article treated with that at that time. Today, there'll be no such reaction because a lot has happened since, and it is quite clear, Madam Speaker, that officers of the state holding sensitive positions have put us in a position where these measures are obviously necessary. Madam Speaker, there are limits to this because we acknowledged a moment ago that some of these measures infringe on what are established constitutional rights. No alarm. We have done that many times since our written constitution in 1992. The very constitution provides for that, and the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, interpreted even by as high as the Privy Council, make provision for that. Nothing new, nothing strange. But we have limited, in the context of the constitutional issues, we have limited the powers exercisable to being able to be exercised in certain limited and specified circumstances. The measures that we offer here today would incorporate safeguards to protect the fundamental rights of persons to ensure proportionality of the measures. One of those safeguards would be the proposed measures would only apply to persons holding posts whose duties involve access to confidential, secret, or top secret information, or where there is a reasonable suspicion that the officer has committed an act of misconduct, a serious criminal offense, or was involved in a serious incident resulting in the death or serious injury of a person. And it is in those limited circumstances, not a carte blanche application of these of the application of this law. It cannot be applied whimsically. It cannot be applied unjustifiably. It is limited in the context, as I have just said to you. Limited to persons who have access to secret or top secret information. It is limited to reasonable suspicion of serious misconduct or serious criminal conduct. Madam Speaker, thus the powers are only exercisable in specific circumstances where the officer performs any intelligence or counterintelligence functions. Let me say at this juncture, on that test alone, there are other agencies that might have to be considered for application under these provisions, if that is one of the tests. But that is a matter that we can deliberate on going forward, Madam Speaker, or even on the floor or committee stage in this debate. Works in an office that deals with secret or top secret or sensitive information, is involved in an investigation involving economic law such as theft, embezzlement, misappropriation, serious or complex fraud, or an act of sabotage or espionage or money laundering, has access to the property that is subject to an investigation, was involved in a serious incident under investigation. A lot of examples come to mind, but for the time being, the next category, the person who is suspected of being involved in misconduct, has close ties to a person charged or convicted of a serious criminal offense under the Dangerous Drugs Act, the Anti-Terrorism Act, or trafficking in persons. Again, Madam Speaker, we could contemplate whether we could add to that the anti-gang law, or whether we could add to that, Madam Speaker, the poker. And it deals with persons, yes, as a result of it, yeah, with respect to members of the protective services and certain officers where a person is killed or injured as a result of the discharge of a firearm by an officer or the use of physical force by an officer while in lawful detention or custody. For example, in prison or in the custody of the police or the customs sometimes. Madam Speaker, so those are some of the limits that we try to build in here. One of the other protections we try to put in here is an exemption from the use of this information. Once it is in the possession of the state, for the laudable and noble reasons I've stated, it will not, that information will not be the subject of the Freedom of Information Act in the sense that it will not be made of, it will be exempted information. So that the office holder is assured in this way that his information will not be made unnecessarily public. So, Madam Speaker, basically, this is the outline. Despite, Madam Speaker, the existence of anti-crime measures, criminal activities persist. Firearms and narcotics, which are illegally brought into the country, linked to the drug trade, gang warfare, robberies, and murders, a lot of the wrong that takes place in this country might very well be with the complicity of officers of the state. This is well known. I have 1,000 examples, Madam Speaker, and I can render several of them, where in the Southwestern Division, for example, I think last year or year before, the then Commissioner of Police wanted to ensure that the people working in a task force in the Southwestern area were polygraphed. Many of them, it was reported, refused to submit, and therefore they were transferred, because in the view of the commissioner at that time, or any reasonable commissioner, that is a sensitive area on the Southwestern Peninsula where people come in here with illegal drugs, human trafficking, guns, all manners of things, and those with the responsibility of protecting our borders, looking out for us, ought to be men and women of integrity, Madam Speaker. Human trafficking being a serious threat. And Madam Speaker, let me say very quickly, in answer to some of my friends on the other side, I mean, we cover here the Registrar General's Department, the Immigration Department. I am aware of a case, Madam Speaker, where it is suggested that a man owed this country $11 million in taxes, wound up paying a small $1 million or something like that. And there was a serious suspicion on the part of an officer of the state for making that possible. Madam Speaker, the question of the Constitution, I just want to touch on that very briefly, although I know my colleagues on this side will dig into a little more details. We consider, having followed the law as it relates to the Constitution, that these measures meet the defratus and the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Lands and Housing and others test. That is to say, the legislative objective is sufficiently important to justify limiting a fundamental right, and these rights in the Constitution are not unlimited. There are limits to them. Secondly, the measures designed to meet the legislative objective are rationally connected to them. And the defratus test also lays down the means used to impair the right of freedom are no more than is necessary to accomplish the objective. So it has to be justified, it has to be rational, it has to be proportionate. And this found favor in the Indian case of Putswami, where the Indian Supreme Court found that the collection of biometrics and they being stored in a state benefit program was quite a legitimate aim. There is no difference in that here. The legitimate aims that are being sought in this bill is to bolster national security efforts, to reduce crime, to identify rogue elements in the protective services and these government departments, to tackle corruption head-on, and to promote public confidence in this country and our systems. It is rationally connected, as I said. Madam Speaker, I indicated earlier, we are trying here to find a balance of the need to test and to maintain integrity and honesty as persons deliver public service. It is not to be applied carte blanche, but are limited in the ways that my short 30-minute time to present to this House would have allotted. Madam Speaker, how much more time, if I might ask, if I do have some more?
You end at 2:55.
I end in a few moments from now. Madam Speaker, so we expect our friends on the other side whose support we expect, because we hear our friends in this parliament complain about crime, complain about murders. They are aware that a weapon went missing, an automatic weapon went missing from a police station under dubious circumstances recently. They are aware that that is not the first time it has happened. Weapons go missing from the Coast Guard. I'm aware of a case where both engines were stolen from a Coast Guard vessel, and I am not identifying for criticism any one organization. All across Inland Revenue, Customs, I am not unaware of issues with customs officers who, being paid and sworn to protect our people and to protect our interests, simply turn a blind eye, Madam Speaker, and allow illicit things to go through for a little petty pieces of silver. We have that. And we have it happening all along. I heard my friends on the other side in the recent whistleblower debate, the member for Old Puchis in particular, say to the public shamelessly that they will not support these measures because they believe they would be used to target the opposition. I don't know how they arrive at that, because in the first place, the government don't apply no law. It is the police who does do that. And if they get locked up, it's the police lock them up, nobody else. But in any event, Madam Speaker, the measures in this bill has nothing to do with any persons other than those who are in the protective services. Sorry. It has nothing to do with, the only people this apply to is members of the protective services and certain elements of the public or civil service, which I have explained time and time again in these measures. So they don't have to have that fear about how it will affect them on this occasion. I am sure they would agree that these measures are necessary, Madam Speaker. And therefore, Madam Speaker, we are open to any commentary, any suggestions, because this is the government's attempt, Madam Speaker, on behalf of you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to introduce measures that we consider necessary. Again, by way of a quick example, Madam Speaker, about 3 years ago, I sat in dismay as a former police officer and read on my newspaper that a marked police vehicle with 2 police officers, both of whom have since been charged for serious offenses, was seen coming out of the same southwestern tip of this country with guns and drugs and stopped by another police. So I take the opportunity to say, while we have many examples of corrupt and illegal behavior that requires testing and checking and dealing with, Madam Speaker, there are many in the organizations who will not be involved in that, and we commend them. However, those men have to go 2 and 3 in the morning, and women too, with certain other people watching the back, so to speak. And therefore, these measures will assist the protective services in help each other to know that the man next to you was not the one who would have called in advance to tell somebody, we come in and set you up. So these measures, in addition to all that I have said, protects members of the protective services. I know there will be objection to these measures. There are those who prefer the status quo. I know there are people who would rather sit on an electric chair than to sit on a polygraph chair. In this country, nothing strange about that. But it is for the Parliament, and the constitutional issues, as I've explained, have been well taken care of, Madam Speaker. We have ensured that the test and the Section 13 requirements have been met on the basis of our experience and knowledge, all built into this with the safeguards, as I've explained, Madam Speaker. And as a consequence, we commend these measures to this House as another critical installment in this government's, and by extension this country's, attempt to make itself safe from those who, by virtue of a lack of integrity and dishonesty and self-seeking, Madam Speaker, would use the offices they hold, possessed of sensitive information, possessed of significant legislative powers, and use them to our detriment, Madam Speaker, rather than to our protection and our uplift. Madam Speaker, with those few words said, I beg to move.
Honourable members, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Judicial and Legal Service Act, Chapter 601, the Prison Service Act, Chapter 1302, the Defence Act, Chapter 1401, the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501, the Civil Service Act, Chapter 2301, the Fire Service Act, Chapter 3550, and the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago Act, Chapter 7201, to provide a regulatory framework for polygraph and drug testing and biometric identification for members of the protective services and certain officers in the judicial and legal service and the civil service, and for other related matters, be now read a second time. Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have listened to the previous speaker in piloting the bill that is before us. And I have to say very respectfully that I am not convinced with any of the arguments. And I think, Madam Speaker, it is important that I start, in light of what I have heard today, that in attempting to pilot this bill and to convince that, this bill will help make some dent in how the government is going to treat with matters of crime and the spike in crimes, that I refer to, Madam Speaker, a debate in this House, 6th of June 2018, and in moving a motion to take note of the Special Select Committee report at that time pursuant to Section 123 of the Constitution, the member for Laventille West stated, and I quote from the Hansard, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, I must say here that in all previous similar processes, polygraphing was conducted on each of the applicants. And in this debate, Madam Speaker, they're referring to the appointment of commissioners of police. And I go on with the quote now, Madam Speaker. In this process, not a single person chosen and submitted under the order of merit list was even polygraphed. I go further with the quote. And I say even because today, in today's world, polygraphing is not the best practice. So these are the words of the member for Laventille West, and I thought I would have heard in talking about the policy from Law Reform Commission, etc., moving forward, that policy paper, and what would have taken place, and a lot of dates were being referred to. But I thought that we would have heard what happened in relation to the science. We tend to hear a lot about the science these days. We would have heard a lot about what has happened with regards to the science which underpins polygraphing, lie detector tests, drug tests, and biometric testing that would have changed between this particular debate in June 2018 to today's date, so that we would know what has happened. And I go further with the quote. There are other improved techniques that are available for such testing. But we have not heard anything about that today, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I have to say with the greatest respect that some of those comments are of the honourable member. I have to say they are disingenuous at best. I don't want to use the word hypocritical, but I have to say that it is really not in bona fides, in keeping with bona fides debate in this House. Madam Speaker, with how it is when we are looking at these measures which require a constitutional majority, the 3/5 majority. And Madam Speaker, as a young nation with a history of colonization, it is important that in looking for the best models in governance, we retain the ability to think critically on what is best suited to our purpose. Critical thinking, Madam Speaker, is key to recognizing our strengths and limitations and building systems to suit. It is no different with this bill. We must look to the advantages and disadvantages of what are being proposed and how fit for purpose they are. So, Madam Speaker, we are here to debate the statutory framework for introducing polygraphing or lie detection testing, drug testing, biometric data collection, and integrity testing into some key institutions of our society. These institutions have been spelled out in the bill, and to the credit of the minister, honourable minister in piloting, he did make mention of those in taking us through the bill. They include inter alia, judicial and legal services, prison, police and fire services, defence force, civil service and financial intelligence unit. Madam Speaker, there's no doubt that these institutions play a cardinal role in maintaining law and order in our society, and the importance of their respective roles is without contention. So I put that on the record. It is easy to see how, without them, society can unravel in a short time. Without them, Madam Speaker, any country can easily become a police state or a failed state. So put another way, Madam Speaker, these institutions are key to good and fair governance and the promotion of democracy, and more importantly, the rule of law. Madam Speaker, the rule of law is probably what distinguishes a civilized and civic-minded society from one where lawlessness prevails. The rule of law guarantees the equality of all citizens before the law. We in this country still believe, and certainly us on this side of the House, we still believe in due process of law. We believe that people are innocent until proven guilty. Madam Speaker, these are non-negotiable principles that underpin our legal system. And to that extent, it is very understandable and in fact laudable that we will want to ensure that persons who are installed in these institutions, especially those who are in key positions therein, are selected with the utmost care. So we have no difficulty with that. I want to put that squarely on the record. We accept that these key positions are often offices which may contain or have access to state secrets or may hold confidential information in regard to matters of national security. So, Madam Speaker, the question at the heart of this debate is whether the method used in verifying the fitness of such persons is justifiable. So, Madam Speaker, this is what the debate really is about. There are instances, please, Madam Speaker, where a polygraph test may be appropriate and even justifiable. But again, we have to look carefully at what is before us. The question is whether this is one of those instances. And that is why the bill requires a 3/5 majority, because it does interfere with constitutional rights. That is not always fatal, Madam Speaker, in the larger scheme of things. Many bills are passed that way. And in striking the balance between the enshrined constitutional rights which are being interfered with, and in this particular case, and the need for finding that honest, industrious person, we must ask ourselves whether the means justifies the end. You see, Madam Speaker, the development of law and policy naturally gravitates toward balancing exercises and trade-offs between competing interests. However, when we look at the trade-off analysis in this particular bill, it is applicable only after we have due consideration to the competing interests themselves, and we make sure that they are well understood. Madam Speaker, in any situation where rights and liberties are at stake, the onus must be on the government. It remains with the government, which seeks to curtail those rights and freedoms to establish the benefits of their proposals. Madam Speaker, I want to make this comment, and this does not only relate to this bill, but liberties, Madam Speaker, are far easier to give away than to get back. We must protect at all costs the rights of privacy, the rights of citizenship, presumption of innocence, freedom of movement, prohibition against unreasonable search, and the privilege against self-incrimination, to name a few. A breach of fundamental justice will clearly arise where an individual's rights have been deprived for no justifiable purpose. So I want to proceed now with the bill to examine what really, Madam Speaker, is on offer from this bill. And I start with the drug testing because I think that is the easiest part to start with. Unlike polygraphing testing, Madam Speaker, the result of a blood test is strictly biological. It does not matter what is going on in your mind. It is based on a urine sample, hair strands, oral fluid sample. A drug test shows the biological proof of drugs in the human system, or not, as the case may be. It is without dispute, Madam Speaker, that drug testing is a crucial facet of the screening process for posts in which mental alertness, sobriety, and clarity are needed. It is part of an employer's duty, Madam Speaker, of ensuring a safe system of work. Because, to put it bluntly, nobody wants, Madam Speaker, the aggression or stupor or stupefaction that drug users who may be fellow employees may display in the workplace. Additionally, Madam Speaker, just by way of analogy, to operate machinery, drive vehicles, and make crucial decisions on the spot all make it worthwhile for employers to request drug testing. When we look, however, Madam Speaker, and I'm moving away from the blood testing now, when we look at polygraph testing, we run into serious problems. Madam Speaker, as we all know, the polygraph has been around since 1921, and that is more than 100 years ago. As we all know, it is supposed to be a device that measures physiological changes in blood pressure, pulse, respiration, and skin conductivity, which in turn, Madam Speaker, is supposed to be indicative of truth-telling or dishonesty. Madam Speaker, permit me to quote from an article from the American Psychological Association entitled, "The Truth About Lie Detectors, aka Polygraph Tests." Madam Speaker, I quote, "Most psychologists agree that there is little evidence that polygraph tests can accurately detect lies." In its findings, Madam Speaker, the paper goes on to say, and I continue with the quote, "Lie detector tests have become a popular cultural icon, from crime dramas to comedies to advertisements. The picture of a polygraph pen widely gyrating on a moving chart is a readily recognized symbol. But as psychologist Leonard Sachs, 1991, has argued, the idea that we can detect a person's veracity by monitoring psychophysiological changes is more myth than reality. Even the term lie detector, used to refer to polygraphing testing, is a misnomer. So-called lie detection involves inferring deception through analysis of physiological responses to a structured but unstandardized series of questions. And I end the quote. Madam Speaker, but I want to, as I end the quote, emphasize that again, lie detection involves inferring deception through analysis of physiological responses. And the word that is used, and I can't stress on it enough, is inferring. It is not a question of certainty. It is not a question of science. It is a matter of inference. So once we talk about lie detecting testing and polygraphing, we are talking about inference. I ask, is that the way we pick and choose the best people for the positions that we are talking about? And or if we want to determine truth of those persons who are in the positions in terms of, alleged misconduct on their part. By subjecting them, Madam Speaker, to a test that lacks certainty and allows us to infer truth. Polygraph testing is not admissible evidence in our courts, Madam Speaker. And the reason is simple. Rules of evidence are strict. They are key to the ascertainment of truth, at least as far as is humanly possible. Truth cannot be guaranteed by polygraph testing. But that is not to say, Madam Speaker, I am not suggesting that other jurisdictions do not allow the lie detector tests into evidence. In fact, in several states in the US, they allow it, including California and Washington. And according to an article entitled, "Are Lie Detector Tests Admissible in Court?" the US Supreme Court commented that there is no reliable scientific evidence about the accuracy of lie detector tests. So, Madam Speaker, what does that particular aspect mean for us? That we can imagine the conundrum that employers can find, and I'm talking about the employers that are the deemed employers under these various pieces of legislation, that they can find themselves in when they take disciplinary action based on the results of a polygraph test. But when faced with legal action, the polygraph tests themselves that they seek to rely upon, they are not admissible in the court proceedings. They might be admissible as to the fact of its existence, Madam Speaker, but not to the truth of its contents. And therefore, that is the conundrum that we can find ourselves in. So remember, we are saying all along, it cannot establish dishonesty with absolute certainty. So I am sure that my friends on the other side will say, it's 6 of this and half a dozen of that. Some jurisdictions allow it while others do not. But Madam Speaker, following on that premise, we here must ask ourselves, if lie detection through polygraph is so unreliable, how come it is still getting so much traction? And Madam Speaker, for something so iffy, it commands a lot of importance, which continues to command a lot of importance and popularity. But those are not sufficient reasons. They are not enough reasons for us to follow fashion and be blindly led by those who use it out of nostalgia and tradition. Which is why in the beginning I started off by citing that June 2018 debate, because I thought we would have heard what has changed the position of the honourable member from that debate to today's date, to tell us why it is all of a sudden polygraphing has become somewhat reliable. Madam Speaker, allow me to quote from yet another article entitled "Zombie Forensics: The Use of the Polygraph and the Integrity of the Criminal Justice System in England and Wales," which appeared in the International Journal of Evidence and Proof. And in it, Madam Speaker, the following was mentioned, and I quote, "Recent developments regarding the proliferation of pseudo-scientific methods in the criminal justice system are blurring the lines between informed decision-making processes and fact-finding dystopia science fiction. That is, between reliable technical devices on the one hand and non-theoretical understanding of human traits and normative concepts such as truthfulness and deception on the other hand." So more specifically, this is the quote continuing, "The notorious polygraph test is enjoying an unmistakable resurgence of usage. Now the question is, why is the polygraph increasingly gaining traction? What makes it so appealing that legal systems jettison fundamental evidential principles, or most importantly, one of their core tenets, that is rationality, by forcing subjects to undergo polygraph tests?" For the avoidance of doubt, Madam Speaker, I'm still on the quote from the article. "I cannot stress enough that ever since the first deployment of the polygraph, criminal courts, scientific institutions, military organizations, and last but not least, academic discourse have continuously and almost unanimously discredited the polygraph as regards its validity in fact-finding processes. What is more, the very scientific paradigm in psychology, which propelled the polygraph into existence, has receded due to its lack of methodology, indefensible empirical basis, and thus deficient validity. The use of the polygraph faces all the usual problems: lack of validity, lack of consistency due to the arbitrary character of polygraph interviews, which invokes Articles 5 and 8 of the ECHR, and the need to use deception and psychological manipulation in order to convince the subject that the polygraph works. So a test is premised, polygraph tests are premised on deceiving the person who is being tested that what is about to be recorded is going to the merits of the truth. What is more, the combination of inadmissibility of the polygraph in the criminal process and its use from probation services creates finally a major contradiction which is detrimental to the integrity of the legal order. I end quote with that particular article. So, Madam Speaker, the article goes on to trace the development between psychological states such as dishonesty to physiological states such as increased heart rate and respiration from an obsolete and discredited paradigm in the field of psychology called introspection. Madam Speaker, if this was not bad enough, it is ironic that the greatest deception comes from the application of the test itself. It is the deception that is practiced, Madam Speaker, by the operators of the polygraph on the subject. That is to say, one person who has applied for that coveted post or who is being ordered to take a test by his superior, this is arguably an abuse that is willfully inflicted on the people from whom we demand honesty and integrity. So, Madam Speaker, again, let me refer to that article, which I want to state again and to remind all that it was published in 2021. And it states, if the examinee declares that he does not believe in the polygraph, then, as experienced polygraphers recommend, certain steps needs to be taken and thus instill fear of detection. This is why I say, Madam Speaker, earlier that you are deceiving the person who is being tested into believing that what is about to be conducted will elicit the truth from them. In that case, the STIM test is conducted before the main part of the interview. This is where persons are not convinced of the lie detector test. What is more is that the examiner is instructed to use the word acquaintance or demonstration test so that the examinee thinks that this is a trivial procedure for adjusting tubes and instruments, while at the same time the psychological test induces the false belief about the validity of the polygraph, generating thus the necessary psychological climate. And this is something that comes also by way of reference of the Office of Technology Assessment 1983 for that particular test. This is an astonishing insight, for in effect polygraph examiners concede that there is no methodologically valid way to assist the accuracy of the examiner's guess other than a cooperating mystified subject. So, Madam Speaker, the ritual deployed by the polygraph examiners can thus safely be regarded as deceptive and fraudulent, and this finds its way in none other than the British Psychological Society 2004. So, this idea is repeated in another scholarly article, which I will not go into, Madam Speaker, but it is entitled Not Very English, on the use of the polygraph by the penal system in England and Wales. And what essentially they continue with the debate in this particular article is, how is it even possible for polygraph to gradually gain the traction again? So it has been tested, it has been tried, and it has been found very much lacking. Madam Speaker, may I ask how much time I have remaining?
You end at 3:24:38.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, we in this country, we have been trained to follow the science. So why not now? You want honesty from people, Madam Speaker, by inflicting dishonesty on them. So, Madam Speaker, I have a hypothetical situation which I would like to refer to as I sum up this polygraph point. Think about the dilemma, Madam Speaker, of Joe Public. Polygraph time for that individual. Madam Speaker, this person is there, he's having a flashback to the childhood days when his mother would say, stick out your tongue and let me see if you're lying. He feels that same nervousness coming back again as he's taking this test, hoping he passes because he's not in the mood for punishment. or having any privileges removed. One difference, Madam Speaker, however, is back then he was a child, now he's a man, and he's not facing his mother. Now he's facing the polygrapher, who don't know him from Adam or any other person. He's praying, he's nervous like the first time. The questions start, Madam Speaker, by the polygrapher. He is praying, it have no technical issues. He is flustered, Madam Speaker. He's overreading into the questions. Anxiety rising, heart rate rising. He almost finished with the test, Madam Speaker. And he begging God, don't let it have a national blackout again, because otherwise he might have to start over this whole polygraph test again. And Madam Speaker, in the end, they think he is lying, but he's not. What is the end result of this so unreliable methodology of polygraphing? He has failed that one. And what is the position of that particular individual? Who do they turn to? So this flawed procedure for polygraphing testing, Madam Speaker, is something that is different from integrity testing. One of the issues with the bill is that you don't have proper definitions even for polygraphing, whether the lie detecting is a subset of polygraphing or vice versa. We don't have really what is the integrity testing. Whilst that is not used in the language of the bill itself, Madam Speaker, it finds its way in the explanatory notes. And yes, that does not form part of the bill, but it is intended, as it is stated in explanatory notes, to indicate the general purport. So I'm saying, Madam Speaker, that even with integrity testing, honesty test, that is a different type of testing which we have heard nothing about, but which in the explanatory note to the bill, it is saying that, that is something that the polygraph and any other lie detecting tests, the drug test and the collection of their biometric information for the purposes of integrity testing. So that is the general purport that is stated with the bill. So, Madam Speaker, such an important aspect of evaluation to determine persons' suitability to important posts and or functions. And this bill has made but passing reference to it. And this is a shortcoming which has to be revisited. Madam Speaker, I turn quickly to biometric testing. And we all know that biometric data for identification includes, and some of it we have heard from the member, the honourable member who was piloting the bill, the use of facial recognition, the iris scan, hand geometry, voice recognition, and certain other behavioral and behavioral characteristics. So, Madam Speaker, there is some anxiety which continues to exist in all countries in the world about the safe use of biometrics. And these are nicely summarized in the Norton website, famous for computer security. And, Madam Speaker, I will not go into that in the interest of time. What I would want to say, Madam Speaker, is that while biometric data will not be subject to the Freedom of Information Act and will be treated as confidential, we do not believe that there is enough guaranteed protection of the employee. There should be full disclosure as to the purpose for which these biometrics will be used. It will surely open doors to the workplace, but employees need to know if their biometric will be used to check their computer activity and their working hours, especially if they will be working from home. In other words, Madam Speaker, consent to biodata is effectively having a camera on you all of the time. They need to know, these employees, exactly what the employers want to see. So, Madam Speaker, if I may share the trend that is developing in certain states in the United States in respect of the collection, maintenance, and use of biometric data, we can turn to biometric data privacy and why employers need to know about it. And that is a very reputed article. And, Madam Speaker, in the interest of time, it really refers to California and Illinois, and they have given their positions on this biometric testing. Madam Speaker, we always want to strike the right balance between doing what appears best for the country and what constitutional protections we are interfering with in doing so. So in deciding whether to support this bill, Madam Speaker, we have to be crystal clear that we do not carelessly overturn basic legal rights and principles in our haste to appoint people or remove them in key positions, from key positions. So throughout history, Madam Speaker, people have always tried to find clever ways of discovering the truth. Whether it is through ordeals, trial by fire or water, today we are looking at torture and polygraph. Not because other countries are using it, Madam Speaker. It means we have to stop critically examining what is best for us. In respect of polygraph, the science is clear. It is deceptive, it is inaccurate, and it is uncertain. There are hacks, Madam Speaker, to beat this system that are even available as to how you go about doing it on YouTube. So I believe, Madam Speaker, that we can do better than what is before us. I want to reiterate that we have not heard, Madam Speaker, from the Honourable Member, really what has changed since 2018 till now in terms of what his position was with polygraphing back then and now. Madam Speaker, I am not convinced that, you know, the lie detect, the polygraphing or the lie detecting testing will have any major deterring initiative or major deterrent, pose a major deterrent on those who may seek to utilize or misuse sensitive information in a manner which is really contrary to the interests of the entities to which they belong. So I have not heard sufficient on that, Madam Speaker, and I'm sure others who come after me will refute it. Madam Speaker, in closing, I want to maintain that at the end of the day, if it is, Madam Speaker, we are to take on board this bill, we should have had proper definitions being placed in it. We should have had certainly what is entailed or conceptualized under the polygraphing, the lie detecting. They are not certainly the same. The science suggests that there are different techniques, and you have to specify exactly what is contemplated. I know the usual, response will be, well, that will come in the regulations. But something as, important as this, I think the enabling legislation should be very clear about what is being considered. This is something that is very new to our jurisdiction, certainly is on what is contemplated here. It has been utilized before. We have not gotten any statistics to show in those limited instances in the police service when it was used exactly how trustworthy it was deemed to be by reference to any empirical data. We haven't heard anything about that. So, Madam Speaker, I want to say that when we talk about the purpose of integrity testing, that is something totally different, which has its own limbs, which is separate and apart, as I said before, from the polygraphing. And therefore, if that is mentioned here, we would have thought and we would have, expected to hear exactly how they are linked. So, Madam Speaker, I want to say that it is very difficult to support this bill in the present format. Hopefully we can hear something that will answer some of the questions. The science is definitely, Madam Speaker, against the use of polygraphing. The drug testing is something that we would wish to commend in principle. The question of biometric data, there are a lot of hazards, and when you look at the law in the jurisdictions cited by the piloter, Honourable Member for Laventille West, in fact, it shows that we don't have sufficient safeguards in this bill. And therefore, we need to see the sufficient safeguards if we are going down the route of the biometric data, biometric testing, and collection of such information. Madam Speaker, with these few words, I want to thank you for allowing me to participate.
The Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the member for Chaguanas West gave a very brave attempt at a bramble. I say that with the most deference to my colleague. The honourable member certainly touched upon the law, in essence setting up the argument that this law is not acceptable to the opposition. In summary, the positions offered by my learned friend are that the science is not with it. And if we look to that, Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask, in light of the policy paper produced by the Law Reform Commission, which looked at the introduction of lie detector tests, drug tests, and biometric identification within the protective services and certain departments of the public services, if the science is not with us, and if we have fair and independent courts in not only Trinidad and Tobago, but in other jurisdictions, I'd like to understand why a law such as the one that we propose today, this miscellaneous provisions law, is acceptable in so many other jurisdictions. Because, Madam Speaker, the United Kingdom operates upon the very systems that we're proposing today with massive latitude. The United States of America with massive latitude, Madam Speaker. When we look to the laws of Australia, we look to the laws of Canada, we look to the laws of South Africa, Madam Speaker, I find it incredible to watch court after court in all of these Commonwealth countries consistently consider the issue of biometrics, drug testing, and lie detectors as constitutionally required in a society such as their societies. Now, Madam Speaker, the fact is the laws of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and the police service regulations already provide for the use of drug testing, the collection of certain biometric information, in that case, physical features and also fingerprinting, etc. We do have the ability to collect DNA evidence for protective services under the DNA Act, and we allow for the provision of lie detectors. So the laws of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago already contemplate use of this, and there has been no striking down of those provisions. None. The 2007 regulations for the police service, Madam Speaker, we are now in 2022. We know that the police service has for entry requirements the use of these techniques that we propose today. And we know, Madam Speaker, that we can introduce it as a term and condition for new entrants, not only coming into, but entrance into specialist divisions. In other words, then, you can decide what the key to open the door to a job looks like. But, Madam Speaker, we are within constitutional clear understanding that our laws, as interpreted by the courts, and I want to refer to a particular case in Barbados, that is the case of King versus the AG of Barbados, 1994. It's a case at the Privy Council, UKPC at 14, where it is an absolute certainty that the state can alter public service terms and conditions. I want to bear in mind, we are not today proposing the introduction of these techniques to any of the office holders who are subject to Section 136 of the Constitution, because those office holders have constitutionally entrenched terms and conditions. But today, Madam Speaker, we are being invited to consider the proportionality, the constitutionality of the laws that we seek in these 9 clauses of the bill. When we look from clauses 3 to 9, 6 clauses, we traverse the following areas. Law officers, i.e. attorneys at law, at the Judicial and Legal Services cover. That's Chapter 601. The law officers that we're looking at there include officers at the Customs and Excise Division, the Board of Inland Revenue, and the Immigration Division. We're looking at the Prison Service, Madam Speaker, Chapter 1302. We're looking at the Defense Act. We're looking at the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501. We're looking at the Fire Services Act, Chapter 3550. We're looking at the Civil Service Act, Chapter 2301, and the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago, Chapter 7201. But, Madam Speaker, in looking at the issue of constitutionality, the first thing is there a legitimate aim to this law? The legitimate aim to this law is, number one, to capture biometric information. Why? Madam Speaker, I'll come to that in a short context. But biometric information, be it facial recognition, geometrical handprint information, fingerprint information, iris scan information, is for the purpose of identifying who in today's modern world may or may not be involved in evidence captured by CCTV cameras or other techniques. 2, we are looking at drug testing, where there's an occupational health and safety requirement, where there are all sorts of our laws which say that you must operate a healthy and safe system and protect others. 3, we're looking at the issue of lie detection. Now, Madam Speaker, we treat the people in the protective services slightly differently from those in the public service, because the Civil Service Act, the FIUTT, and also the JLSC, we say that they can only be subjected to this law while on duty. The protective services, fire, defense force, police, we say that they must be in the course of being treated whilst on or off duty. The purpose of this law, the legitimate aim, is to narrow the gates in relation to a very narrow basket of matters, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to know, in the face of all of the many jurisdictions that have these very laws, as I've identified some of them, I'd like to know, Madam Speaker, if the opposition does not consider it important to have top secret information managed by people who are trustworthy, if the opposition thinks it inappropriate for people who are the subject of espionage or people who are the subject of money laundering accusations to not be subjected to detection tests. I'd like to know if the opposition thinks it unreasonable for people involved in misconduct of duties, for people involved in the proximity of dangerous drug matters, anti-terrorism matters, trafficking in persons matters, to be so far out of the realm of rationality that we as a serious republic in this world cannot today do like other countries do and say, we too deserve first world protection. We too deserve to have people subjected to the law, because to whom great power is given, much responsibility and expectation is to be had, Madam Speaker. And we think it materially important to bear in mind that serious matters, and if you look to the defense force, the police service, and you look to the fire services, and we look to subsections 2 in each of those acts as we put them in irrelevant positions, and we get down to the letter H, we're talking about, Madam Speaker, serious incident means an accident resulting in the death of or injury to a person, damage or destruction of property or environmental risk, any risk of death, injury, damage, destruction, and harm. And when we go, Madam Speaker, into the fact that we are looking specifically where a person is killed or injured as a result of the discharge of a firearm by the officer, or the use of physical force by the officer, or while in lawful detention or custody, Madam Speaker, what could be more important to the country, to Trinidad and Tobago, to know that officers who are in service, law enforcement officers, are also subjected to the highest standard of scrutiny in relation to matters such as these. Madam Speaker, we have had people marching up and down Trinidad and Tobago. We've even had members of the opposition participating in marches themselves, where the cries come out as to whether there is a fair scrutiny and due process to law enforcement being subjected to a higher standard, because, Madam Speaker, you have a sense of safety afoot. And, Madam Speaker, when we talk about proportionality, Madam Speaker, what we say in this is that we are limiting it in the civil service side, that is the civil service, the JLSC, and the FIUTT, to while you're on duty. In the protective services side, the fire services, the defense force, the Trinidad and Tobago police service, while you're on duty or off duty. But, Madam Speaker, is there or is there not an argument that people who are involved in trafficking in persons ought to be subjected to the kind of scrutiny that we're recommending, and that other countries also apply? Madam Speaker, is it good enough that the FBI is viewed to be a successful entity, the CIA, SO15 in the United Kingdom, MI5, MI6 in the United Kingdom. But in Trinidad and Tobago, we can't have, because the opposition holds the key to this, the ability to use polygraphing, other lie detection tests, drug testing, or biometric data. Why, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, we have included the Registrar General, which falls under the Office of the Attorney General, into this mix. The Registrar General, by virtue of Act number 12 of 2020, is now responsible for the Real Estate Agents Act. By virtue of Act number 17 of 2020 is the Miscellaneous Deeds, Registration of Deeds Act. The Miscellaneous Provisions, Tax Amnesty, Pension, etc. Act 2019, Valuation of Land Act, Property Tax Act, Registration of Title to Land Act, State Suits Limitation Act, State Land Tribunal, Land Adjudication, Miscellaneous Provisions, all of the package of laws that we passed in the period 2016 to 2020 put the legal officers of the Registrar General, falling under the office of the AG, into direct responsibility to manage the records of Trinidad and Tobago, where we have also mandated, if you look to the Non-Profit Organization Act, or you look to the Real Estate Agents Act, that sensitive private information has to be considered and kept at the Registrar General's office. The Financial Intelligence Unit is also similarly circumstanced. And therefore, Madam Speaker, when we're looking to the issue of proportionality, we have targeted the points to receive this law down to the narrowest parameters possible. And therefore, we begin to satisfy the three-limb tests of constitutionality, be it de Freitas, be it any one of the leading cases, RV Oaks, whichever way you want to go. There are umpteen cases on proportionality in Northern Construction in our own Court of Appeal. But, Madam Speaker, the legitimate aim finds itself rationally connected by saying you cannot be the repository of sensitive and secret information where one missing document can result in the difference between innocence or guilt, whichever way you want to look at it, and not have responsibility. Now, Madam Speaker, we accept that this law traverses the right to private life. We accept that this law traverses the obligations that we're looking at to protection of law, be it in Section 4B of the Constitution or private life in 4C. The equality of treatment in 4D is touched upon. The right against self-incrimination, Section 5.2D of the Constitution, they are all traversed. The question is, are we going too far? So in answer to that, Madam Speaker, and in underwriting the constitutionality, I say we are narrow in focus. We are treating with sensitive, top-secret information. We're treating with trafficking in persons. We're treating with dangerous drugs. We're treating with anti-terrorism. We don't go for every matter, Madam Speaker. In it, we say that the results are confidential in every one of the clauses. We say they are exempt from freedom of information, Madam Speaker. If you look to a very recent decision coming out of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, Bloomberg versus ZXC, and that was a case 2022 delivered just a couple days ago, the 16th of February 2022. When you look at what the Supreme Court in the United Kingdom balanced in considering Article 8 and Article 10 of the European Court of Human Rights context of the European Charter, and saying that it is a balancing act between private life and a balancing act between freedom of expression. When you looked at the fulminations of that court, it was quite interesting to note that underwriting the constitutionality of the bill today, we also have the newfound tort of abuse of private information. But Madam Speaker, when you go down to the fact, who in this country could really tell us that money laundering is not the route to criminality? Why would the opposition, again, for the umpteenth time, refuse to support a law that tackles money laundering? What is it? Who is it in the opposition bench that has a problem with trafficking in persons, where we have seen the abuse of young women in particular vulnerable persons in the context of Latin American young women and children being abused, Madam Speaker, in trafficking in person, why would the opposition stand against a fighting chance to stop the abuse of the vulnerable in trafficking in persons? Madam Speaker, anti-terrorism. Who could say that Trinidad and Tobago didn't have an issue in the public domain trumpeted by the opposition in relation to contributors in the fight that ISIS took to the world? That unholy and improper pursuit, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, why would it be outside of the contemplation of Chaguanas West to say that it's good enough for the United Kingdom, for Canada, for New Zealand, for South Africa, Madam Speaker, for the police service in our regulations right here? Why is it good enough for everybody else except the UNC? Why? You see, Madam Speaker, they make this academic and otherwise large charade that they will support laws. But Madam Speaker, today this law can't pass if there's no opposition support. Today, the people of Trinidad and Tobago cannot get another tool in the arsenal to fight the war against trafficking in persons, money laundering, to deal with anti-terrorism, Madam Speaker, to deal with the Dangerous Drugs Act. These are the same honorable members that stand up and say Trinidad and Tobago is a dangerous place. These are the same honorable members who today can support a position, an intellectual position to say, let's give all people on charges of murder the right to bail, but when we're in government, we won't do it. Madam Speaker, how do you take an opposition such as the honorable members opposite seriously, Madam Speaker? How do we genuinely say that Trinidad and Tobago is pushing its way forward? Madam Speaker, all of the clauses here say that the head of a department can direct, order an officer under the various acts that we're looking at to be subjected to biometric, to drug testing, and to polygraphing. What could be wrong with biometrics? What could be wrong with drug testing? Okay, you have a problem with telling the truth tests, lie detector tests. We say that it is to be confidential, but I'm asking, what is the odium here? This law does not accept the right against self-incrimination or the right to remain silent. We do not accept the right against self-incrimination here. If an officer says no, what is the consequence? It falls to due process. It falls to disciplinary matter. It falls to consideration as to whether there is a breach or not, Madam Speaker. But Madam Speaker, what could be objectionable in relation to the very narrow purport of top secret information? Information concerning the records of Trinidad and Tobago, national security interests, Madam Speaker. What could be wrong in ensuring that the highest form of vetting is provided there?
Is now spent.
I thought you'd give me a 5-minute warning. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Caroni Central.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the recognition and the opportunity to contribute this afternoon on the bill entitled the Miscellaneous Provisions Testing and Identification Bill 2022. Madam Speaker, this bill, as was indicated by the speakers before, seeks to amend quite a number of bills, be it the Judicial and Legal Services Act, Chapter 601, the Prison Service Act, Chapter 1302, amongst others. Now, very instructive in this piece of the amendments that are to be made to these various pieces of legislation proposed by the government this afternoon is the fact that the regulations are yet to be laid, Madam Speaker. And when you look at the explanatory note at the very beginning, it says that the bill will be inconsistent with sections 4 and 5, and therefore, pursuant to section 13, a 3/5 majority of members is required so that the bill can be passed today, please, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, one, I intend to, provide some very critical, constructive criticism of the bill before us this afternoon for the consideration of members opposite, if they should so desire. And very early on, Madam Speaker, I am saying that if we are going to circumvent and curtail and sidestep sections 4 and section 5 rights, it is very important, Madam Speaker, that those of us on this side are aware of what the regulations are, and at least the regulations in draft form ought to be laid together with the bill before us, Madam Speaker. That is our position. Our position is that we will support good legislation. But we cannot support good legislation blindly, Madam Speaker. The government cannot come to this House and dance and say that the opposition is unpatriotic, the opposition is this, the opposition is serious about crime, but they're asking us to circumvent rights without laying at least the draft regulations before this House. Madam Speaker, if it is that we are to support this legislation today, and I am to go into my constituents on a walkabout, like I see members on the other side going about doing walkabouts and so forth, and a constituent should ask me, why did you support this bill? Are you sure the regulations that are to follow will be in our best interest? I will be unable to answer that, Madam Speaker, and that is one difficulty I have this afternoon in supporting this legislation in the present form. Had it been that the regulations were laid together with it, I may not have had that disposition. So that's one of the very first piece of constructive criticism I would like to lay on before the members opposite. Madam Speaker, as I move on and I look at the bill, the amendments seek to amend, different acts, the different chapters in about the same way in terms of the way in which it's structured. So therefore, when you deal with, for example, the Prisons Act or the Police Service Act, it's about, more or less the same enactment across the different pieces of amendments to the existing legislation. Now, there's one particular issue which I think requires debate, please, Madam Speaker, and that is the definition. Any of the sections, for example, I'm using the I believe it's the first one, the Judicial and Legal Service Act. You look at confidential or sensitive information, and under the definition section, this is section 11A3, and you go 3B. Confidential or sensitive information means information which reasonably could be expected to cause damage to national security if disclosed without prior consent. But, Madam Speaker, it is very noteworthy that this House not too long ago debated the whistleblower legislation, and whilst it was not passed, this bill seeks to say that you cannot disclose without prior written authorization. So the question becomes, Madam Speaker, what if one of these officers identified, any one of his section, law officers in the civil service, wants to disclose misfeances in the civil service via the whistleblower legislation or via any other means, they will require prior written authorization to do so. So, therefore, there is no collaboration and or unisons in respect of this legislation before us today and the one we debated 2 weeks ago. What are you saying? What is the government saying to the population. We are encouraging whistleblower or no? But we are encouraging whistleblower, but you need written prior consent.
We're not debating whistleblower. All right? Please, let's stick to this. Okay?
I'm guided, please, Madam Speaker. So I am saying under the definition here, you require prior written authorization to disclose anything of national security. Madam Speaker, as we proceed along the bill in one of these clauses here, in any one you'll see generally in exercise, for example, in the exercise of the powers granted, for example, under the Prison Service Act, the powers granted under subsection 1, it says, the Commissioner of Prisons may order an officer to submit to any or all of the other tests or collection referred to in subsection 1, and these refer to the polygraph, the drug testing, and biometric information. And then one particular situation arises, Madam Speaker, at H, where it says, where a person is killed or injured as a result of discharge of a firearm by the officer or the use of physical force by the officer or while in lawful detention or custody. Madam Speaker, our courts are littered with instances of, in respect of the prison service, accusations of persons being beaten and injured. And this, if you look at H, it speaks generally about, literally about somebody, the use of physical force by an officer while somebody is in lawful detention. And our court system is littered with accusations and matters before it in which prison officers and officers of the prison service are asked to account in respect of beating in prison. So therefore, there's one particular issue which arises here. Now, when you look at the exemption, the fact that this information is going to be biometric, the different pieces of information, the polygraphic information and others, are going to be exempted from the Freedom of Information Act. How then can somebody who is brought before the courts, for example, somebody who has brought an action against someone in the prison service, know, for example, whether or not a lie detector was performed on the person who is alleged to have beaten the prisoner or the person in custody? And it is very instructive that as part of the criminal proceeding rules, the prosecution is required to disclose initial disclosure of all pertinent information, whether it undermines, whether it assists or undermines the case. Now, you cannot say, for example, Madam Speaker, that you are, moving the overriding objectives of the criminal procedure rules forward, and in one instance, and then in the other instance, you are exempting information from the ambit of the Freedom of Information, Madam Speaker. So I think that is very instructive in terms of persons who have matters before the courts in respect of being injured whilst in custody. It's very important that they have access to persons who may have committed these acts against them. For example, when a lie detector or other biometric information has been gathered in their matter, please. So that is the second point which I'd like to raise this afternoon, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when you look at the Data Protection Act, the information here is going to be stored, to talk about the storage and the storage of this information. Madam Speaker, my question to those on the other side is, how is this data going to be stored? Either it's going to be electronic, it's going to be hard copy. We have not been told how this information is going to be stored. Madam Speaker, we have had a Data Protection Act which has been partially proclaimed. So our question is, you're not proclaiming the Data Protection Act, but you want to produce to this House a bill which requires data to be protected. So how is this data going to be stored? If electronic, what systems are in place to protect such sensitive information? Where is the data going to be stored? Is it going to be stored on a server? Is it going to be stored in a server room? Where is it going to be stored? Madam Speaker, we are not told this type of information in respect of the bill before us this afternoon. How is the data going to be protected? Who is going to have access to this data, Madam Speaker? And how is the data, under what conditions are the data to be destroyed? So, Madam Speaker, those are some of the questions which require answer in respect of the bill before us. And I ask that the government, if they can, and they're able to please provide some clarification as the debate continues. Madam Speaker, I think something that is very instructive and something that has not been told in respect of the polygraph test, Madam Speaker. We are not told what type of polygraph testing is proposed. Now, for example, in my reading of polygraph test benefits and challenges, it is noted that there are basically different kinds of advanced polygraphic tests being used in lie detection. We have the control question test, the guilty knowledge test, or the concealed information test, and the neuroscience-based advanced polygraph test. We are not told what type of polygraph test that these civil servants will be subjected to. Because very instructive in this report, Madam Speaker, it's called Polygraph Test Benefits and Challenges. It's by the Higher College of Technology, and it says, Kate 2015 reported that polygraph tests, especially the earlier types of tests, tend to produce two different kinds of unexpected results. They are false negatives and false positives, which are a wrong classification of the test subjects. According to the author, while a false negative declared the true guilt subjects as innocents, the false positives misclassify innocents as guilty. He says that it is apparent that the declaring innocent people as guilty would be far more dangerous than misclassifying guilty persons as innocents. Therefore, Cass suggests that it is inevitable that the test developers and researchers may pay more attention to innovate the methodology or develop measures to prevent the occurrence of false negatives and false positives so that polygraph tests could be effectively and widely employed in detecting lies. So basically, the long and short of that, Madam Speaker, is that there are some loopholes in respect of polygraph tests producing false negatives and false positives, which can have a detrimental effect, especially in the case of false positive, misclassifying innocent persons as guilty. And there has been some advances, but we are not told what type of testing the government rely on in respect of these civil servants to be subjected to. Madam Speaker, it goes on to say, Madam Speaker, that that you can plug some of the loopholes, but it's not completely scientific. So that is very important, because we do not want to have persons who are innocent having to wait for long trials just because there has been a wrong polygraph test administered on them. So, Madam Speaker, as I almost wrap up, there's one point I would like to add to this debate further, is the fact that is complete and something that we can close our eyes and support this afternoon, Madam Speaker. And I would really like if the government can consider looking at some of these issues and producing something that we can really support to move forward, please, Madam Speaker. With those few words, I thank you for the opportunity.
Member for San Fernando East.
Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to contribute in the debate on this important piece of legislation, the Testing and Identification Bill of 2022. Madam Speaker, I listened intently to some of the comments made earlier. I'm not sure how to respond to what was said by the member for Caroni Central, but the member for Chaguanas West stated that the science does not support this piece of legislation, Madam Speaker. But unfortunately, every time this government brings a piece of legislation to this Parliament designed to stamp out white-collar corruption in Trinidad and Tobago, especially in the public service, it is not supported by those on the other side. Which leads me to wonder, Madam Speaker, if science doesn't support every piece of legislation that we have brought to Parliament thus far, from the Testing Identification Bill, which we bring today, to whistleblower legislation, to even aspects of the TTRA bill, Madam Speaker. They do not support it. And I leave that, and I leave the determination to why to the members of the public of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. But let's go into the bill. Madam Speaker, this bill seeks to amend several key pieces of legislation. The Judicial and Legal Services Act, Chapter 601, Prison Service Act, Chapter 1302, Defense Act, Chapter 1401, Police Service Act, Chapter 1501, Civil Service Act, Chapter 2301, the Fire Services Act, Chapter 3550, Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago Act, Chapter 7201. Madam Speaker, this bill seeks to provide a regulatory framework for polygraph and drug testing and biometric identification for members of the protective services and certain officers in the judicial and legal service and the civil service and for other related matters, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I will restrict my presentation to the institutions which fall under the Ministry of Finance, mainly the Customs and Excise Division and the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, this bill is designed to allow for the testing of an individual's integrity. It's an integrity test in accordance with the principles of natural justice. Now, Madam Speaker, listening to some of the previous speakers, you would think that somehow employees of these institutions, their rights are being violated by the application of these integrity tests. But of course, the application of these tests would be in keeping with the principles of natural justice, and especially in terms of reasonable or probable cause, Madam Speaker, in terms of whether a person can be tested or not. It also aims to provide an equitable, consistent, and proportionate response to intelligence in accordance with existing criminal legislation, protective services legislation, and employment law. So the previous speaker can rest assured that this bill is not going to trample over several other pieces of legislation, as he seemed to allude in his presentation. The government of Trinidad and Tobago is committed to maintaining the highest standards of integrity in these sensitive agencies. Now, Madam Speaker, I'm sure you can imagine within the Customs Division and the FIU, the employees there would be handling extremely sensitive matters. And the important part of this legislation is that it's not just about protecting our institution. It's not just about an exercise in institutional strengthening, but it's also designed to protect the employees or public servants that work within these institutions. That is an extremely important point. This policy is related to the investigation of corruption and applies to all staff, including temporary or contract staff with the protective services, civil services, FIU, and Customs and Excise Division. Madam Speaker, as this government has shown through the introduction of various pieces of legislation, we are committed to stamping out corrupt practices within the public service, and we will continue to do so. This bill seems to formalize an acceptable means of addressing allegations of corruption in the form of intelligence-led integrity testing. Now, once again, it is done from the form of intelligence, Madam Speaker. It is based on intelligence, sorry, where we are allowed to apply an integrity test. Now, the definition of an integrity test. An integrity test creates a condition or situation designed to generate a reaction by an individual or individuals so that their conduct, behavior, and professional standards can be assessed. Integrity tests are well recognized for their deterrent effect on corrupt practices and act as a form of institutional strengthening in combating acts of corruption, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, institutional strengthening is essential to national development, and this entails improving principles, minimum standards, best practices, business processes, references, and tools for effective, efficient, and sustainable organizations. Now, it would be obvious that if persons within an organization are regularly tested, it makes them less susceptible and less willing to be involved in acts of corruption, Madam Speaker. It makes them less vulnerable and less likely to be targets to unscrupulous persons within our society who may want to compromise them for their own benefit. The United Nations, no less, has supported this and has stated unequivocally that corruption and illicit trade contributes to state weakness, impedes economic growth, and undermines democracy. These activities take the form of smuggling of commercial goods, drugs, counterfeits, dangerous and harmful goods, cross-border money laundering, and commercial fraud, such as under-invoicing and misclassification that impedes the collection of state revenue. Madam Speaker, that came directly from the United Nations. In order to be responsive to these challenges, it is clear that a strong and effective customs administration framework is vital to economic and social development. And of course, we must provide those in charge with the tools to enforce and to strengthen these institutions. Madam Speaker, you have to remember that these are important institutions dealing with very sensitive matters. This legislation is designed to deal with the most glaring vulnerability in any institution or organization. And that vulnerability is, of course, its people. Madam Speaker, I'm going to tell you about one of the most famous computer hackers in the world, a gentleman by the name of Kevin Mitnick. Kevin Mitnick could hack any computer system. He's well known for the past few decades. He was on the FBI's most wanted list. But what is most noteworthy about Kevin Mitnick is that he had limited knowledge about how to use a computer or technology. Yet he hacked several, at least 40, of some of the largest and most protected organizations in the US, including the US Pentagon. Now, how did he do that? He did it through the use of social engineering and by targeting the employees of the organization. Social engineering, in the context of information security, is the use of deception to manipulate individuals into divulging confidential or personal information that may be used for fraudulent purposes. And Madam Speaker, in this case, it doesn't just have to be deception. It could also be coercion or forcing employees through some type of leverage to divulge this important or sensitive information. Yes. During the course of his computer hacking career, Madam Speaker, he hacked over 40 major corporations, including the US Pentagon. What he would do, Madam Speaker, he would call senior members of an institution, pretending to be a member of the IT department, and they would give him their username and password. He'd pretend to be a maintenance engineer within an organization, and people would leave sensitive information laying out on their desks, also post-it notes that gave access to some of the most sensitive information on computers within the organization. Kevin Mitnick is the main reason why many organizations have their trash professionally disposed of and incinerated, because he would spend hours going through an organization's trash where he would find, again, more passwords, more sensitive information. He would target the people and not the actual systems themselves. At one point, a federal judge, before he was sentenced, banned him from using all telecommunication devices because they thought he could launch nuclear weapons by whistling over the phone. That is how convinced he had persons of his ability to hack any system. Today, he's a trusted security consultant for Fortune 500 companies and governments worldwide. So, Madam Speaker, as I said earlier, the most vulnerable part of this system are our people. And this bill, though it may seem invasive and intrusive, is designed to protect the employees of these sensitive organizations, Madam Speaker. The less vulnerable we make our employees at these sensitive units, the less likely they are to become targets of unscrupulous individuals seeking to corrupt those institutions. It protects both employer and employee, which is extremely important, and it's a point that I think those on the other side should consider. They become targets and to persons who would seek to corrupt them and the institutions. It protects both employer and employee. I hope my friends on the other side understand this. The less vulnerable our public servants, the less vulnerable our institutions, and the more effective they become at promoting national development. That is what institutional strengthening is all about, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when it comes to the Customs and Excise Division, Clause 7 of this bill amends the Civil Service Act as it inserts a new section after Section 11. This new section allows the head of department to order an officer of the Customs and Excise Division. Note again, Madam Speaker, the head of the department is not some random individual. It is the person in authority, the head of the department, to order an officer of the Customs and Excise Division, Board of Inland Revenue, Registrar General's Department, or the Transport Division, subject to subsection 2, to submit to a polygraph or any other lie-detecting test, drug test, or the collection of biometric information. I don't think we have mentioned, the Minister of National Security earlier mentioned exactly what biometric information means. Biometrics are body measurements and calculations related to human characteristics and can be used as a form of identification and access control. It can include fingerprints, height, weight, blood type, saliva, urine, etc., Madam Speaker. So, Customs and Excise Division provides services, and these are the important sensitive services that are provided by this particular institution. Revenue collection and protection, correct application of trade policy, protecting our physical borders, society and the environment, collecting and disseminating accurate trade-related info and statistics. Madam Speaker, this bill prescribes in Clause 711A, 2, under what circumstances the measure proposed in the bill can be used. And I've heard quite a bit from some of the earlier speakers where they made it seem as if there were no rules in terms of the application of this integrity test. But clearly it is outlined in the bill exactly when and how and by whom this integrity test can be used. Where the officer performs any intelligence or counterintelligence functions, where the officer is assigned to a section, unit, department, or division where top secret, confidential, or sensitive information is accessed, processed, or stored, where the officer is part of or involved in an ongoing investigation involving economic loss such as theft, embezzlement, misappropriation, serious or complex fraud, or an act of sabotage, or espionage, or money laundering, where the officer has or had access to property, information, or files that is the subject of an investigation, where there is a reasonable suspicion that the officer was involved in a serious incident under investigation, where there is a reasonable suspicion, again, reasonable suspicion, that the officer is suspected of or involved in misconduct in relation to an ongoing investigation by law enforcement into the commission of a serious criminal offense, where the duties performed by the officer in relation to his office, post, or activities involves having access to or dealing with top secret, confidential, or sensitive information, Madam Speaker. Where a person is killed or injured as a result of the discharge of a firearm by the officer or the use of physical force by the officer, or while in lawful detention or custody, or where the officer is in proximity to a person charged or convicted of a serious criminal offense under any of the following acts: the Dangerous Drugs Act, Anti-Terrorism Act, or Trafficking in Persons Act, Madam Speaker. I'm sure several of those acts would cause concern by some on the other side. Madam Speaker, I move on to the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, in Clause 9 of the bill, it amends the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago Act by inserting after Section 7 a new section. The section will allow the director of the FIU to make an order of an officer subject to subsection 2 to submit to a polygraph or any other lie detecting test. Again, a polygraph or any other lie detecting test, drug test, and collection of biometric information. And this is done by the director of the FIU. So it is not a politicized or political position. It is done by the independent director of the organization. Additionally, in Clause 9A, 7A2, it spells out how these powers that have been granted to the director of the FIU must be exercised. So again, there are rules and regulations and parameters in which these integrity tests can be applied. So I'm sure several of the former speakers on the other side can now rest assured that this legislation will not be used to compromise or attack or to somehow remove the rights of the employees of these important and sensitive institutions. Madam Speaker, the FIU effectively monitors non-regulated financial institutions and listed businesses for which it is the supervisory authority and takes the necessary measures to secure compliance with AML and CFT legislative regime of Trinidad and Tobago, AML anti-money laundering and CFT combating financial terrorism, Madam Speaker, two extremely important and sensitive issues in contemporary Trinidad and Tobago. As such, the main functions of the FIU-TT are to receive and analyze suspicious transactions and suspicious activity reports from other financial institutions and listed businesses, supervise and monitor the effectiveness of the system, and cooperate and liaise with other authorities and stakeholders. Now, Madam Speaker, if those on the other side had supported other important pieces of legislation, the FIU would have far more teeth in terms of going after white-collar criminals. But as I said earlier, every piece of legislation we bring to this House in order to deal with white-collar crime is totally and completely rejected by those on the other side. I will allow the public to ask themselves why. Madam Speaker, as such, given the sensitive nature of the information that the FIU would be dealing with, confidentiality is paramount, and as such, this proposed piece of legislation will not only help to strengthen the mandate of the FIU, but also aid in strengthening its transparency and accountability. Further disclosure is prohibited by the effect of Section 7A and 27.3 of the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago Act. A polygraph examiner or other person to whom information acquired from a polygraph examination is disclosed may not further disclose the information or records. Additionally, the information garnered via integrity testing is exempt from disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act, Madam Speaker. The relevant department heads of the various institutions are the ones that are responsible for applying this integrity test, and the information gathered is also protected from public perusal. Integrity testing operations may only be authorized if there is a reasonable suspicion. Again, may only be authorized if there is a reasonable suspicion, so there is a legal standard, to ensure that the rights of the person involved are not trampled. A reasonable suspicion that a staff member has committed, is committing, or is likely to commit an offense punishable on conviction by imprisonment of 12 months or more. Madam Speaker, this is called reasonable cause. And there are several offenses that would fall under this legislation. These offenses include, but are not limited to, bribery, Madam Speaker, abuse of public office, possession of a controlled drug, dealing in proceeds of crime, associating in support of serious organized criminal activity, fraudulent conduct, unauthorized data access, unauthorized disclosure of information. So in winding up, Madam Speaker, earlier the member, my friend from Chaguanas West, spoke again about the science involved. And I have to say that...
Speaking time is now spent.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker.
Member for Naparimo.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I listened intently to my colleague, the member for San Fernando East, who happens to be, well, I reside in San Fernando East. I think the member is new to Parliament, and he made a comment which we need to deal with upfront as I begin my contribution. He has said that he is unaware of the number of times, unaware of the times that we have supported legislation. And he raised the point as to our, and I'm using my words here, recalcitrancy with respect to supporting government's legislation. I wish for the records.
That is not what I said. Thank you.
I wish for the records to indicate the number of legislations we have supported which required a special majority. And this is for the record. The first, the Tax Information Exchange Agreement, United States of America, Act 2016, known as FATCA. We supported that. The Anti-Gang Act 2018, which required a special majority. We supported that.
48.1. We are speaking about this particular piece of legislation, not the anti-gang.
Please have a seat. Have a seat. Continue, Member for Naparimo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just for the records and in response to what you said, we supported the Insurance Act 2016, the Anti-Terrorism Amendment Act 2018, and the Licensing Committee Validation Act 2018, passed in this House on the 18th of June 2019. I wish to make the point that we are committed to supporting good legislation, not legislation that. And Madam Speaker, if you give me a second, I will indicate, you see the self-righteousness on that side. I'll indicate that during the period 2010 to 2015, the PNM did not support the Constitutional Amendment Capital Offences Bill 2011. They did not support the Miscellaneous Provisions Remand Bill 2010. They did not support the Administration of Justice. I could go on and on. The Bail Amendment Bill 2013. So don't come here self-righteously pontificating that we on this side are not prepared to support good legislation, particularly when it deals with a special majority. Madam Speaker, I wish to make the point that was made by my colleague before, that here today we have come with legislation that is critical, that is crucial, that is affecting the fundamental rights and freedoms that are enshrined in the Constitution. And today we would have liked to see the regulations pari passu, side by side with the legislation, so that we could look at the thing holistically and see what we are agreeing. And Madam Speaker, this seems to be a pattern. I recall over and over they talk about tedious repetition, but we need to see the regulations so that we on this side can make an informed decision with respect to the legislation before us. On 4th December 2020, my leader, the member for Siparia, made the point, and I quote, "This is the procurement office. They have been working since 2018. They have done a lot of work, including the prep of the regulations. We have thought you would be coming here to lay the regulations."
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise respectfully on Standing Order 48.1.
And Member for Naparimo, I uphold the objection. Please, we're not going into the procurement regulations. You've made a point, and I think you've demonstrated. Please move on.
I wish to show how it is done differently in other jurisdictions. In the UK, where they lay both so that when decisions are made, they're informed by the regulations. The UK introduced the polygraph rules in 2009 to accompany the Offender Management Act, 2007. The rules make provision for inter alia, and it deals with what we are dealing with. Qualification and independence of polygraph operators. That's Rule 3 and 4. It makes provision for the requirements for polygraph sessions, Rules 5 and 6. They make regulations with respect to the polygraph supervisors. That's Rule 7. And for reports every 6 months for the polygraph provider to the UK Secretary of State. Now, under this bill that we have before us, none of the above is addressed. What are the qualifications of the regulator, the persons who are going to do the polygraph test? What are the qualifications? Are the tests to be standardized across all the agencies, the Board of Inland Revenue, the Customs Authority, etc., the TTPS? Are they going to be standardized? These are the kinds of things that an informed Parliament would like to be apprised of so that we can make a decision. So under this bill, none of the above is addressed. And while the bill does make provision for the making of regulations to provide for the implementation of the said measures and the collection of biometric information, as well as the storage, maintenance, and disclosure of the tests and information, the House has not been furnished with any such draft regulations to inform its understanding of the legislation and how it will be operationalized. I move on. Madam Speaker, the bill would confer an express power in clauses 3 to 9 on the following office holders to order an officer or law officer to submit to a polygraph or lie detecting test or a drug test. And it lists those who are empowered to order an officer. The head of department in the Customs and Excise Division, the Board of Inland Revenue, and the Registrars General Department, the Commissioner of Prisons, the Chief of Defense Staff, the Commissioner of Police, head of department in the Customs and Excise Division, the Immigration Division, etc., etc. Madam Speaker, we have no problem. Understand this clearly. We have no problem with the legislation. We have no problem with the intent of the legislation. It is laudable. We have a problem with what we call in the dialect, throwing us to make a decision. Thank you. To make a decision, what we call cat in bag. Take this thing. You are not apprised of all the operationalization aspects, and we are asked to decide to support. And if we do not support, we hear that, not in this forum, but we hear elsewhere that we are unpatriotic. Madam Speaker, we have no problem with this or the head of departments instructing officers to submit themselves to polygraph or lie detecting tests or drug tests. But we ask the question, who are going to guard these guards? These people who will be instructing their subordinate staff to submit to various tests. We ask the question, what is good for the goose is good for the gander. And we would like to know, fully ventilate, why, for example, you are doing the heads of department and not the officers. Especially since we have a commissioner of police who the Prime Minister had problems with. So we're asking, the commissioner of police is going to have the right to instruct his subordinates to submit to a test, but he is free. Who will guard the guards? What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Who will be responsible for requesting polygraph or drug tests from them? What role will the Police Service Commission or other oversight bodies play? We need to know. And in fact, I have no problem with Parliament being subjected to these tests. I have no problem. But as a personal opinion, I have no problem. So where does the buck stop? And that is what we ask in this bits of legislation. But there are all kinds of issues. Mr. Speaker, and let me say here up front, we understand clearly that with great power comes great authority, great responsibility. Law officers are not ordinary citizens, and therefore stakes are higher, and in this regard, they wield significant powers and ought to be subject to different levels of testing. However, they too are entitled to rights and protection under the law, and these rights must be protected. Also, all assessments and investigative procedures must meet the threshold of being scientifically reliable and legally reasonable. Mr. Deputy Speaker, my colleague spoke today about polygraph testing, and I wish to look at it from a different angle. How reliable, how accurate, and how valid are these polygraph testing? And I quote CNN, September 7, 2018. The American Psychological Association believes lie detector tests are inaccurate. Their underlying problem is theoretical, and this is what they posit. There could be many other reasons for a person to breathe more rapidly or experience a rise in blood pressure, heart rate, and sweat. But that is not all. In 2002, the National Research Council of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine concluded that the U.S. government should not, I repeat, the U.S. government should not use polygraphs to screen or clear employees or to identify spies, because the evidence showing lie detectors work is scanty and scientifically weak. And yet I heard the Honorable Attorney General say, England uses it, America uses it, the CIA uses it. Why should the UNC is not supporting? And I refer him to the National Research Council of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. You see why we have a problem in this side about scanty research, inappropriate intellectualism, and an inability to comprehensively bring legislation that is well thought out to this House. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the crime report, September 19, 2019, Thomas Morello, he is a former senior polygraph examiner who worked at the U.S. Defense Department, not the Trinidad Coast Guard, the U.S. Defense Department for 30 years, and is currently a professor at the University of Maryland. He states that polygraph tests merely measure a physiological reaction, perspiration, or an increased heart rate, but they do not determine whether a person is lying or deceitful. So we ask the question on this side, having regard to the science, where, what, why, to whom, and what, and will this thing be, this polygraph testing be applied, and what is the efficacy? What are you going to do with it? You're going to lock up, jail, report, fire, demote, transfer? And a test that the scientists are saying is unreliable? A quote from the psychology, detecting deception, current challenges, and cognitive approaches, Wiley series in the psychology of crime, policing, and law. It says the difference between an innocent's fear of false detection and a guilty person's fear of detection cannot be identified by a polygraph. So here we are in Trinidad and Tobago in the 21st century, in defiance of science, bringing legislation, and we're saying, yes, we may agree, but let this go to a joint select committee, let us analyze, let us flesh out, let us come, as the scripture says, let us reason together. the Canadian courts have refused to admit the results of polygraph tests as evidence in criminal trials. They use it in Canada, they use it in England, they use it in the CIA. The Canadian courts have refused to admit the results of polygraph tests as evidence in criminal trials. The Supreme Court of Canada has ruled that they are unreliable and risky and would not assist the court in determining a person's guilt or innocence. CBC, December 15, 2020. I have my facts. I don't come here unprepared, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But that is polygraph testing. Let's go to drug testing and biometric identification. You see why we need to discuss? You see why we need to interact? You see why we need to bring the best legislation and the best science and the best technology to the legislation? Biometrics. Let me educate the member for San Fernando East, my MP actually. Biometrics are unique physical characteristics, such as fingerprints, that can be used for automated recognition. According to the Biometrics Institute of Australia, there can be at least 15 different types of biometrics, including DNA, air shape, eyes, facial recognition, fingerprints. How many types of biometrics will be collected as identification from relevant personnel? We need to know. Will it be fingerprint or DNA or facial? Again, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the storage of this type of data cannot be taken lightly. We're going to have information on persons that can be used against them. And if you happen to be a member of the opposition, we have to be careful. And it has nothing to do with crime. We are no less sinners than those who are abroad. We are just concerned, the citizens, that this information is stored responsibly and it is used in the interest of reducing crime and not for political expediency.
Remember, you have 2 more minutes.
Only 2? The UK Guardian, August 14th, 2019, there was a major breach found in the biometric system used by banks, the UK police and defense firms. The fingerprints of over 1 million people, as well as facial recognition information, unencrypted usernames and passwords, and personal information of employees was discovered on a publicly accessible database. The biometrics database was unprotected and mostly unencrypted. And I ask, is this not a cause for concern? If it could happen in the UK, where all this information could be leaked, imagine the potential for disaster under this PNM administration, who is not known to be competent in terms of the operationalization of the governance of Trinidad and Tobago. Time beats me, but their drug tests. Which medical labs will be contracted to conduct these tests? The scope of this legislation can cover thousands of officers and civil servants. What will be the expected cost of conducting these routine tests? Will the government utilize public health officials to prevent exorbitant bills, given that most drugs have rapid tests done via urine samples? Are our already overwhelmed health services burdened by this requirement? Let us discuss these things. What are you afraid of? Good governance requires fleshing out, operationalization, best practices. Let's bring those things to the table and let us reason together. Will the government simultaneously be increasing PTSD, that counseling services for officers, given that some may abuse drugs due to psychological traumas associated with their jobs? So when you discover it, what do? You fire, transfer, or do you rehabilitate and remediate? Mr. Deputy Speaker, you see why the regulations we have, the regulations are needed? I am fed up of coming to this parliament and dealing with half-baked legislation. I have documents here that could amplify, edify, and make the thing better. Because we are interested in first world legislation. That is what we are about. And as I take my leave, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I plead with those opposite. Do your homework. Do your research. Come here with good legislation. So when you come with bad legislation and we take you, and the lawyers take you to court and they get money, you say UNC lawyers against the government. But you're making it easy for them to win cases against you. We just want the bill yesterday. I didn't have even read the details. I thank you very much.
I recognize the member for Lopino, Bourne West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, what a performance. What a performance. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it was indeed extremely difficult to follow the inappropriate intellectualism of the member for Naparima. Mr. Deputy Speaker, for 20 minutes, the member for Naparima was all over this parliament. He started by Aruka Maloney, he jumped to Tobago East, he went to San Fernando West, he bypassed Naparima, he ended up in Princestown, and I think he ended up at his last stop by either Couva South or Pointe-à-Pierre. He was all over the shop. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the honorable member for Naparima said during his contribution that the bill is laudable, that there is nothing objectionable in the intention of the bill to ensure that we have our security services, our civil services, the judicial and legal services, having a regulatory framework in place to ensure and to have integrity testing for their employees and their officers, members of the police service, members of the protective services. The member for Laventille West who piloted this bill laid down clear and concise arguments as to why in Trinidad and Tobago we require a legislative framework to ensure the integrity of some of these institutions, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as we have indicated on numerous occasions in this parliament, we do have a problem. We have passed several pieces of legislation in our arsenal, in our fight against crime, white-collar crime, violent crime, human trafficking, money laundering. And one of the things that we need to confront as a society and as a parliament is that those who are charged with the responsibility to enforce the laws, they do have the morality and they do have the integrity to do that. Because if we don't do that, then all the efforts that we are making in this parliament to ensure that we have a legislative framework to tackle the belly of the beast, they will all fall in vain. The member for Naparima said that the bill is a laudable bill. There is nothing objectionable. But yet still, he took every opportunity to say why the bill should not be supported by the member of the opposition. The bill stipulates that upon its passage, the minister with responsibility for national security will have the power via affirmative resolution of Parliament to pass regulation for its enforcement. Affirmative resolution of Parliament means that the bill will go through a period of debate in the lower house and in the upper house, where members on both sides of the house will have the opportunity to argue against and in favor of any of the provisions of the bill, similar to what is happening right now. In other words, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the regulations are not going to be passed in the dead of night. And what we are seeking to do here is to put the primary legislation in place, and thereafter, the bill provides
that via affirmative resolution of Parliament, the Act will come into effect, similar to what we have done recently in the procurement legislation. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would want to give a personal perspective with respect to integrity testing, especially in the national security arena. I think it is public knowledge that I spent a significant portion of my life in law enforcement. And the last agency that I was employed in was the Special Anti-Crime Unit of Trinidad and Tobago, where I left in 2009 before joining the Legal Service Unit in the Ministry of Works and Transport then. That was a unit, Mr. Deputy Speaker, where you need to subject yourself to integrity testing even before you enter the doors of that unit. And I had to be subjected to polygraph testing on random occasions in order for me to continue to discharge my duty in that organization. I know many people, especially those on the other side, cannot boast of subjecting themselves to integrity testing in the same way that I have been subjected to integrity testing. But I can tell you, Mr. Deputy Speaker...
Mr. Deputy Speaker, 48.6, the member is imputing improper motives in relation to the integrity of members of the opposition with the statement he just made.
Overruled. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can tell you that during the existence of the Special Anti-Crime Unit, before it was gutted by the members opposite, especially the member for Couva South, who was part of the government that gutted the Special Anti-Crime Unit, that made a significant role in the fight against white-collar crime and violent crimes in Trinidad and Tobago. That organization was dismantled. But before it was dismantled, the organization was very effective in tackling the issue of white-collar crime and violent crime in Trinidad and Tobago, because every single officer and every single employee, civilian and or uniform, had to subject themselves to integrity testing to remain part of the unit. It was a very successful organization because of some of the procedures and the rigid scrutiny that employees had to subject themselves to remain within the organization. I can tell you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I will tell the entire country, that I witnessed on several occasions employees having to be marched out of the building because they would have failed integrity testing. It happened, and I witnessed it. You see, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is not something that one needs to take lightly. Because being a member of the Special Anti-Crime Unit and going on missions and speaking to your counterparts in international jurisdictions, especially in England, in America, in Canada, and other countries around the world, they will not even speak to you if you are not subjected to constant integrity testing. And what we are trying to do here is to ensure that the organizations that we have identified in this piece of legislation, that they can have the respect by their counterparts in the international arena, especially when they are involved in the investigation of serious crimes and money laundering and drug trafficking and human trafficking and terrorist financing. This is what we are dealing with here today, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is no joke. It's not about standing here and nitpicking at every single thing and making a big joke, even misquoting the Bible. I've never heard a verse in the Bible that talked about, come let us reason together. Even misquoting the Bible, the Honorable Member for Naparima.
jumping in and out of the bill. But what we are discussing here is serious matters. Putting a regulatory framework in place, a legislative framework in place to ensure that our prison service, our police service, our defense force, the Registrar General Department, the FIU department, unit, all of them, they are respected by their counterparts in the international arena. That is what we are trying to do. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I could also tell you from a personal experience, because the bill talked about the Transport Commissioner having the power to subject some of his officers to integrity testing as well. 2 or 3 years ago, the Honorable Attorney General can tell you, when we made some fundamental changes to the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, one of the things that we did was to put together within the bowels of the licensing division a traffic enforcement center unit. A unit that was responsible for administering the demerit point system, the red light camera traffic system, the fixed penalty ticketing system. And some civilians were recruited, handpicked, well-qualified, highly qualified civilians were recruited in a very transparent process, and they were subjected to national security vetting, interviews, etc. And one of the last things during that vetting process, one of the last things they were required to do was to subject themselves to polygraph testing. It wasn't arbitrary, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It was part of the policy because we recognize that that unit being placed now within the licensing division will have access to very sensitive information on members of the society, very sensitive information on their driver's permit and other records that, if placed in the wrong hands, can jeopardize national security and the stability of Trinidad and Tobago. And in that process, all of the civilians that were recruited to work in that unit had to subject themselves to polygraph and other vetting of this nature. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this Parliament will be shocked to know that we had highly qualified candidates representing themselves very well in interviews, etc., even background security testing. And when it came to the polygraph testing, we almost recruited kidnappers, murderers, people involved in drug trafficking, money laundering, all shown up by polygraph testing. Today, I can tell you that the Ministry of Works and Transport and the government of Trinidad and Tobago can boast that after 3 years of existence, there was not one allegation of misconduct in public office by any member of staff of the Traffic Enforcement Center unit. And in the same way, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we can say of the same thing for the Special Anti-Crime Unit. Because I had experience working at the Special Anti-Crime Unit where officers from the DA and Scotland Yard, those international law enforcement agencies, will not speak to no one in Trinidad and Tobago or any law enforcement agency in Trinidad and Tobago that does not have a system of integrity testing. They will not collaborate with you. They will not share sensitive information with you. They will not share sensitive information with you. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are operating in an environment where we need collaboration not only at the local level, but at the international level, speaking with your counterparts and sharing confidential and sensitive information. Information that may sometimes bring down governments, that may sometimes destabilize a country if placed in the wrong hands. And this is what we are trying to do. This is what this bill is aiming to do. And I ask members of the opposition, I believe that you are inclined to support the bill. I don't accept that the absence of regulations will prevent you from supporting the bill, because you are quite aware that there are provisions in the bill that allow the Minister of National Security to bring legislation or regulations and to have it debated via affirmative resolution of Parliament, where both sides will have its say before the regulations come into effect. And therefore, I ask the opposition to let us put aside all the partisanship, let us put aside all the other issues that you are seeking to create. Let us put aside that, because we need to protect our national security. We need to protect the men and women in uniform, operating in very sensitive departments, being involved in very sensitive investigation, being exposed to explosive information, to ensure that the process maintains and have certain integrity, and that their counterparts, not only locally, but internationally, will have that respect for them. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me quote a Newsday article dated Sunday, the 8th of November, 2020, and speaking to the situation in Trinidad and Tobago where law enforcement is concerned. And I quote, "Trinidad and Tobago was assailed by the damning evidence of police involvement in drug trafficking, U.S. counterfeit rings, murder, prostitution, and a host of serious crimes almost 35 years ago." It go on. "Enterprise which unleashed the scourge of cocaine from Colombian cartels on the streets and safe trafficking routes for marijuana growers. Witnesses, including police who testified in secret before the Commission of Inquiry established in April 1984, claimed that Randolph Burroughs, together with a band of untouchables, aptly named the Flying Squad, were linked to drug barons Dole Shady, Naim Nayan Ali, Chetram Gaya, Adela Moses, Teddy Mais Khan, Hossein Bitilal, Aladdin, and other violent drug traffickers, as well as corrupt judicial officers. They were protected by the Commissioner of Police, and rivals were silenced as cocaine crept their way." Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. "As cocaine crept its way through the corridors of power and even the nostrils of government ministers. All of them are now dead. Some were murdered, executed by the state, and missing at sea. But the stains of corruption in the police service remained and seems to have infiltrated the ranks of the defense force." This is Trinidad and Tobago. And this is why, as legislators, we have a responsibility to assist these organizations, our loyal men and our loyal women who are working hard every single day, and sometimes they are placed in harm's way. Their lives are risked because there are elements within their ranks whose allegiance is not to Trinidad and Tobago, but for those who pose a risk to the stability of Trinidad and Tobago. And as I end, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I made reference to my friend and colleague from Naparima, when he said, "Let us reason together in accordance with Holy Scriptures." But I want to put it into perspective because I don't want to misquote my colleague from Naparima. And I suspect he was referring to Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18 in the King James Version. And it said, "Come, let us reason together, saith the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they shall be like crimson, they shall be as wool." And therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will apologize to my friend from Naparima, and I put into better context the quotation from Holy Scriptures. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank you. I thank you for the opportunity.
That's an excellent note to end on. I said that's an excellent note to end on, quoting the Scriptures. Chief Whip. Leader of the House.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this House do now adjourn to Friday, the 25th day of February at 1:30 p.m. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is Private Members' Day, so we'll await my colleague who may be able to tell us which motion we do.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Thank you, my leader, my friend. We'll be doing on Friday motion number 4, moved by the member for Tabaquite on education.
So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this House to now adjourn to Friday, the 25th day of February at 1:30 p.m., and we'll be doing motion number 4 under private business.
Honourable members, the question is that this House do now adjourn to Friday, the 25th of February, 2022 at 1 p.m. All in favour, at 1:30 p.m. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned to Friday, the 25th of February, 2022 at 1:30 p.m.